I have created scientific magic. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 326. The Imperial Griffin Knights crossed the border. After the light speed measurement experiment was completed, this year's academic seminar finally came to an end. However, the method of using gears to measure distance is still talked about with great interest. Then came the award ceremony held in the Sky Realm. The three nominated people, Thura, Glenn and Yoland, all successfully won the Morning Star Medal. Lin En also won another Silver Moon Medal with this light speed measurement experiment. However, the wizards were very divided about this award ceremony. Most wizards believed that the light beam measurement method proposed by Lin En could only be described as a genius. Although this experiment alone is far from meeting the requirements for obtaining the Silver Moon Medal, it is not a big deal to be a little more tolerant of geniuses, not to mention that the other party has even won the Corona Medal, so it is not jealous. However, some wizards have complaints about the Magic Star winning the Silver Moon Medal. Although Lin En's experiment is very exciting, even amazing, the final result is just to measure the speed of light. This kind of medal is usually only awarded to those who have made outstanding contributions to the wizard land, developed legendary magic, or made important additions to the existing magic system. In their opinion, measuring the speed of light obviously does not correspond to any of them. It can be said that the Parliament has made a very bad start this time. As the center of the torrent, Lin En did not focus on gaining praise and refuting slander. He continued his research on basic elements. Occasionally, he was pulled out by Raphael and others to get acquainted with the great wizards stranded in the wizard city. Lin En did not refuse the communication between the great wizards. These people are all the best among wizards. Among them, there are great wizards who have won the Morning Star Medal or even the Silver Moon Medal many times. In a sense, they are the Newton and Einstein of the other world, and the backbone of the development of magic. On the third day after the academic seminar, all the members who stayed in Greenreal City received invitations from the Parliament. Lin En was no exception. He knew that the purpose of this meeting was mostly to discuss how to deal with the invasion of the church. However, just before Lin En left, the halfling Darren, who should be far away in Yaita at this moment, ran over with his men in a panic. "Dean, it's not good, it's not good." "What's wrong, Darren?" Lin En frowned, and had a guess in his mind. "It's the information from the kingdom of Hadrada. Just yesterday morning, those Imperial troops suddenly crossed the border," Darren said breathlessly, and handed over a sealed letter. This was much faster than he expected. Lin En pondered and opened the envelope directly. After reading it, his expression suddenly became very solemn. A day ago, at the border of the kingdom of Hadrada, two huge airships were suspended in the air at an altitude of 1,000 meters for routine patrols. As a glorious airship pilot, Hami has dreamed of flying freely in the sky like a bird since he was a child. However, he knew very well that it was an unrealistic fantasy without any magic talent. A hoe and a piece of farmland were the future he could foresee. If he was lucky, he might even be able to buy a camel beast, so that he could save some effort when farming. But since the new dean arrived in Yaita 2 years ago, everything has changed. Hami put down his hoe and joined the newly opened glass workshop, because he could earn the salary of half a year in 1 month there. Then he heard that the dean planned to recruit some civilians and train them to become airship pilots. Hami couldn't believe his ears when he got the news. In his opinion, these airships that are larger than a house but can rise into the sky are the greatest magical creations of wizards. It is a great gift to allow them to spend money to experience it. Can these civilians who don't know magic also control such magical creations? However, despite his confusion, Hami immediately quit his job in the workshop and joined the pilot training. In addition to figuring out how to control this huge machine and understand a magical alchemical instrument that always points to the north and south, he also needs to learn arithmetic and math. For example, how to estimate the distance between the airship and the target through appropriate reference objects and some simple formulas, and this is just the most basic reconnaissance subject. Poor Hami has been hoeing the land for most of his life, so it is natural that he is dizzy. According to some gossip, this thing called math is difficult even for some wizards. These efforts obviously brought him extremely generous rewards. The monthly reward increased from 10 silver coins to 20 silver coins, and he didn't need to work in the factory day and night. It made his dream come true in another way. So when he heard that Dean Lin En was going to select some airship pilots to perform dangerous tasks, Hami chose to participate without hesitation. Half of it was to repay the dean's kindness, and the other part was because during the mission, the remuneration would be doubled. If they died accidentally, their families would receive a full pension of 10 magic gold coins, and they would also receive the best care in the future, and could even go to civilian schools for free. Hami and the other pilots were undoubtedly carrying out the mission with the mentality of dying, but after wandering around the border of the kingdom for more than a month, their tense minds gradually relaxed, and they even thought that what the wizards said might be a little too exaggerated. They were now thousands of meters high in the sky. They only needed to see the Empire's troops crossing the border from a distance, use binoculars to spy on intelligence, and then return to Yayata to report. What danger could there be? However, during this month, patrolling back and forth in the same area made Hami feel bored. Although he liked the feeling of flying in the sky, he became a little bored after flying in the same place for a long time. Hami fantasized in his mind that it would be nice if he could fly to the other side of the world to take a look. Wait, Hami, what do you see over there? The deputy next to him suddenly shouted loudly as if he had discovered something. Hami immediately turned his head and looked over. In the distant sky, there seemed to be a golden cloud floating towards them. Why did it look so strange? Hami used the telescope mounted on the airship to observe, and then his pupils shrank. This was not a cloud, but a large group of monsters with eagle-like heads and fire lion-like hindquarters. The bright golden eagle feathers showed a golden halo under the sunlight. From a distance, it looked like a cloud moving. It was a griffin, the Empire's Griffin Knights. Chapter 327, Damaged Airship and Air Battle at the Border. There were no such things as griffins in the wizard land, but before they left, the wizard masters had told them about the intelligence of several special corps of the Empire, and the Griffin Knights were one of them. Retreat, retreat quickly, Hami shouted loudly, and his deputy immediately turned the direction of the airship and fled to the kingdom, and immediately pressed the optical invisibility button. A spherical shield immediately appeared around the airship, and the huge airship quickly disappeared in a distorted light. The griffins following behind all let out a series of sharp howls, but they did not run around in a daze as Hami expected because they lost their target. Instead, they sped up again and surrounded them in a very orderly circle, more than twice as fast as before. Damn, these guys are too difficult to deal with. Even invisibility can't fool them. Hami cursed inwardly. He had only a limited understanding of griffins and didn't know that this magical creature had a very high sense of smell, and could even smell the blood of its prey from several kilometers away. The mere disappearance of vision would not cause much of an obstacle to them, not to mention that it was invisible in front of them. But this couldn't be blamed on Hami and the others for not being cautious enough. Although the polarization magic on the airship was useful, it consumed a lot of magic power to hide such a huge creature, so it could only be used at critical moments. Considering that they might need to stay in the outside world for 2 or 3 months this time, the pilots would save as much as possible on magic crystals on weekdays, and it was impossible for them to be so extravagant as to use the invisible magic to perform the mission all the time. Quick! 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 Hami and the others raced against time and quickly pulled the joystick to the maximum. After the huge airship completed the difficult change of direction, a large amount of magic power was converted into hydrogen, and the internal combustion engine ran at full power. The rest of the crew members held their muskets tightly, but they were too far away now and did not fire rashly. The speed of the airship was getting faster and faster. The Griffin Knights, who had already pulled the distance very close and even vaguely formed an encirclement, were surprised to find that this huge thing like an airship actually burst out with a speed that exceeded the speed of the Griffin flying in the sky. As the captain of the Griffin Knights, Dewey also did not expect this. In his opinion, such a huge alchemical instrument should run slowly, but the speed of the airship was unexpectedly fast. If this continued, they could only watch the other party slip away under their noses. Duai's eyes were very cold. From this short contact, he had already listed this strange alchemical creation as a major threat that must be cleared. Duai knew very well how much a flying object that could carry people, was invisible, and was extremely fast could play in the war. The other party must be left behind, and it would be best to intercept this alchemical creation as intact as possible. Thinking of this, Duai immediately lowered his head and communicated with the griffin under him, and roughly estimated the direction and distance of the two sides. The northeast direction was about 600 meters away. This is a height that bows and arrows cannot reach, but Devi is full of confidence, because before becoming a Griffin Knight, he was a clergyman. Fortunately we run fast. Seeing the airship rushing out of the enemy's encirclement at a very fast speed, Hami and others breathed a sigh of relief, their hearts full of joy of surviving a disaster. Even though they have long been prepared to sacrifice, if they can run away, no one will think that they live too long. As long as they run farther and the enemy loses their position, they will be completely safe. The crew members present also relaxed together. The deputy, who was always paying attention to the enemy's movements, had a warning in his heart, and then he rushed to Hami without hesitation and pressed him into the cabin. Almost in the next second, a violent shockwave flew over from a distance and hit the cockpit of the airship directly. The huge airship shook violently, smashing the baffle on one side. Except for Hami and the deputy, who were pinned down in advance, the rest of the pilots were thrown out by the impact and hit the wall beside them heavily. However, before they could recover, the second wave of attacks came again. Praise Allah! Holy light shock! Duai and several Griffin Knights who were also clergy shouted loudly again, and strong light waves came in an instant and hit various parts of the cockpit. Although special materials were used to make the airship, and each airship had alchemical arrays such as toughness, solidification, lightness, and windproof, it could not withstand the continuous bombardment of divine arts. If Duai and others had not wanted to intercept this strange alchemical creation intact, the airship would have been shot down long ago. But even so, under the second wave of attacks, the aerospace airship was also seriously damaged and its speed was becoming slower and slower. Damn it, the propeller outside must be broken. Hami's eyes were red. Having studied the structure of airships, he naturally knew what this meant. Without power, they had lost hope of escaping. Everyone, since these bastards won't let us live, we can only fight them. Hami turned his head and looked at the people present, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Fight with them! Killing one is not a loss, killing two is a profit." The pilots, gunners, and observers present shouted in unison, with a look of determination on their faces. The lives of these civilians are very cheap, and no one cares about their lives on weekdays, but it is different in Yaita. They can exchange for 10 magic gold coins. This is enough. If they can kill a few more enemies, it will be a huge profit. After the shout, Hami and others stopped dodging and instead picked up the muskets in their hands and shot at the rapidly approaching Griffin Knights. Continuous gunshots soon rang out 1,000 meters in the sky. Since it was the first time for the Griffin Knights to face muskets, they were not prepared for this strange weapon and several griffins were shot at once. But their results were very pitiful. As the leader of the Warcraft group, the griffin has very strong vitality. Unless it is hit head-on in the head or hit by several musket shots in succession, it is far from fatal. A very courageous Griffin Knight rushed forward, relying on his exquisite flying skills and an unpredictable flight route. He luckily avoided the first round of shooting and flew to the front of the airship before the next round of ammunition was loaded. Chapter 328 The Cracked White Phosphorus Fire. Accept God's Judgment, Sinner. The Griffin Knight raised the warhammer in his hand and shouted at Hami and others. In just a few seconds, the distance between the two sides had been shortened to about 20 meters. Hami and others on the airship were still eagerly loading bullets. Obviously, this powerful alchemical instrument cannot fire continuously. He has won the first place today. A complacent look appeared on the Griffin Knight's face, but the next second he saw Hami suddenly throw away the musket in his hand, take out a bottle of reagent shaking with a strange liquid from his pocket, and smash it directly at him. Under the gallop, it was obviously too late to dodge. The griffin under the knight's feet let out a sharp howl, and when its wings vibrated, a strong wind turned into a wind blade and cut the reagent bottle flying in front directly. But this is exactly what Hami wants, because this tube of reagent is the latest creation of the Alchemical Research Institute, the magic potion, Breath of Cold Wind. Of course, this is Lin En's method to fit the name of the wizards. In fact, it is filled with liquid nitrogen. As the contents were destroyed, the ultra-low temperature of nearly 200 degrees below zero immediately showed its amazing lethality. The white mist expanded rapidly and enveloped the Griffin Knight. Almost instantly, a thin layer of white frost appeared on his head, hands and armor. The griffin under his feet was no exception. The strong vitality and magic resistance made him struggle for a second longer, and then he crashed into the baffle of the cockpit with an amazing momentum, and then turned into an ice sculpture and fell from 1,000 meters in the air. Several Griffin Knights who also wanted to take credit saw the miserable state of their companions and quickly changed direction, rapidly climbing to a higher altitude, and began to destroy the conspicuous airbag above the airship. The airbag was made of very tough camel leather, but under the scratching of the griffin's sharp claws, it was no different from a thin piece of paper, and soon it was scratched and cracked. A large amount of hydrogen filled inside continued to gush out. The reason why it was not helium, but the more dangerous hydrogen, was naturally to make it more convenient when it was self-destructed. Hami and others' resistance soon reached its limit. The airship was not equipped with anti-aircraft firepower. After all, it was difficult for artillery to hit an enemy moving at high speed in the air, and it was not as useful as the muskets in their hands. After experiencing the power of the muskets, the Griffin Knights were not on the same plane as them at all, and flew higher or lower to attack. Everyone, now is the last moment. They did not continue to use that powerful divine attack. There is only one possibility, that is, they want to capture us alive and intercept this airship. Hami looked at the people present and said in a deep voice, "Once they succeed, what awaits us will be endless torture and humiliation." He was responded to by silence. No one replied, but their eyes were extremely firm. Hami pressed a wooden button. In the bottom of the airship cabin was opened. Inside were black shrapnel bombs as big as a human head, filled with gunpowder and white phosphorus, with very powerful anti-ground firepower. The airship has limited air-to-air capabilities, but it is very powerful against the ground. If the advance force that crossed the border this time was less than 1,000 people, they could be completely defeated with this airship. But now it has become a means of mutual destruction. Everyone silently lit up the torches, and they had to decide their own fate. At this time, Devi was destroying the airship from the bottom with several Griffin Knights, but the sense of danger brought by the long-term fighting on the battlefield vaguely raised a warning sign in his heart. Devi trusted his perception very much, and immediately commanded the Griffin under his feet to stay away from here, shouting loudly, "Disperse, all of you disperse." The rest of his colleagues carried out his orders very faithfully, but unfortunately they were still a step late. As the 5 torches were thrown down, a violent roar resounded in the sky thousands of meters high. Hundreds of shrapnel shells exploded at the same time, and the huge airship disintegrated from the inside in an instant. Finally, the airbag filled with hydrogen on top was detonated, and the surging fire wave instantly swept in dozens of nearby Griffin Knights. The tragic wails continued, and it seemed as if a rain of fire was falling from the sky. Those Griffin Knights who died directly in the first wave of explosions were even considered lucky. On the contrary, the Griffin Knights who were only affected by the fire wave were truly desperate. Devi was one of them. With his extraordinary sixth sense, he successfully escaped from the core area of the explosion, but his body was still ignited by the waves of fire. It was an indescribable burning sensation. Devi struggled to beat the white phosphorus fire on his body in vain, and even his hands were burned. The Griffin under his feet was like crazy, shaking wildly in the air and doing various stunts until his whole body was ignited and rushed down like a fireball. Since it has decided to retake the kingdom, the church naturally cannot send only some air forces, and even the most elite God's punishment army has been sent. After Devi fell to the ground with the Griffin under his feet, The bishops surrounded him and performed hydrotherapy to mobilize the water molecules in the air in an attempt to extinguish the flames. However, the situation did not improve at all. Devi was still screaming in pain, and the flames seemed to have penetrated into his flesh and blood, burning from the inside. Just as the bishops were horrified and at a loss, a voice rang in their ears. "Stop, this is the hellfire summoned by the wizard, and it cannot be removed by ordinary means." The speaker was a middle-aged man wearing a red and gold robe and an iron mask. "Lord Edwell." Everyone present bowed their heads and saluted, and then asked respectfully, "Then how should we deal with it?" Edwell looked directly at Devi and suddenly spoke, "Hold your breath." Devi had been tortured by the terrifying white phosphorus fire and was about to lose his mind, but after hearing what Edwell said, he still clenched his teeth and held his breath. "First, remove the air. This is the first condition for burning." Edwell raised his hand, and a soft light enveloped Devi, and the terrifying white phosphorus fire was immediately suppressed. "Secondly, remove the injured flesh and blood to prevent it from absorbing nutrients. Finally, treat it." As Edwell spoke, the originally soft white light suddenly turned into a murderous weapon. A layer of Devi's skin and flesh was directly cut off, and even the white bones could be vaguely seen. His eyes were wide open and he almost fainted. Fortunately, this pain only lasted for a few seconds, and the lost flesh and blood soon grew back under the effect of the magic. Chapter 329 Lin En. It's time for white phosphorus to be eliminated. The whole treatment process was over in just 3 minutes. When Devi stood up again, his injuries had completely healed. Edwell had personally experienced this strange immortal fire outside the harbor town. The intelligence transmitted from the kingdom also emphasized that the other party used this thing to destroy tens of thousands of elite troops of the kingdom. Since he was leading the army personally this time, he would naturally not be unprepared. "Thank you, Lord Edwell," Devi said gratefully, and his expression was even more ashamed. He took the initiative to lead the team just to seize the huge alchemical creation so that he could study a way to crack it. In this way, some casualties can be reduced in the next war. Who would have thought that the other party would not only succeed in self-destruction, but also cause the death of more than a dozen Griffin Knights? Devi was very regretful. If he hadn't wanted to capture the enemy alive, they could have used divine magic to directly destroy the alchemical creation. As a punishment for the failure of this mission, in the future, whenever the Griffin Knights are dispatched, you must rush to the front to meet the enemy until I give the order to retreat, and the enemy is defeated or dead. Edwell's cold words rang in Devi's ears. It took the death of more than 10 Griffin Knights to destroy an airship. This was obviously unacceptable to Edwell. A Griffin Knight can usually only be selected from the elite troops of the Empire or even the God's Punishment Army. In addition to the tacit training and combat training, it takes several years to form a Griffin Knight, and this does not include the cost of raising and training a Griffin from childhood. It can be said that a team of Griffin Knights can bankrupt a wealthy dukedom just by training, but now they died here. If it were not for the imminent war, every bit of power would be particularly precious. Devi's fate should be to be escorted back to accept the arbitration of the tribunal. "I swear in the name of God, from today on, I will lead the troops and die," Devi swore excitedly. Edwell nodded, and at the same time, the rest of the Griffin Knights also flew over, bringing back the bodies of their companions. The deaths of these people were more horrible than each other. Some died in the explosion with mutilated bodies, and some were corroded by white phosphorus, and the flames continued to burn. The surviving Griffin Knights also suffered a lot in order to bring back the bodies of their companions. Due to the lack of intelligence, many of them were stained with this terrifying flame. Without waiting for Edwell to take action, the rest of the bishops followed suit and began to treat these people. This strange hellfire is very strange and difficult to extinguish, but once you know how to deal with it, even a bishop can handle it. After Edwell just gave a few instructions, he walked to the 2 bodies covered with white frost, stretched out his hand to sense it, and although he didn't really touch it, the ultra-low temperature of more than 100 degrees below zero still made his palm feel faintly condensed. "What a terrible cold front!" Edwell's expression became a little solemn. It was another difficult magic. What concerned him more was that according to Devi's report, The people driving the huge alchemical creation were just some ordinary people who could not use magic, but they relied on the creation of alchemy and magic to cause considerable casualties to the elite Griffin Knights of the Empire. After pondering, Edwell suddenly seemed to sense something and turned his head to look in the direction of the distant sky. 4 kilometers away in the sky, another airship was moving towards the direction of Yaita at a very fast speed. As the captain, Alex was observing the enemy with a telescope. When he saw Edwell suddenly turn his head and look over here, he was immediately startled. He could find it even at such a distance. Alex couldn't help but take a breath of cold air, and his legs felt a little weak. The airships patrolling an area were arranged in pairs, 3 to 5 kilometers apart. This was to ensure mutual support to avoid accidents, and to prevent someone from using powerful magic to directly shoot down the airship and then quietly enter the kingdom's territory. When Ali saw Hami's airship being attacked, he wanted to rush to rescue them, but who would have thought that in just a few minutes, they witnessed the airship being surrounded by Griffin Knights and finally self-destructing into a ball of fire. Ali immediately realized that it was too late, and immediately gave up their plan to provide support, turned the airship around and fled. The most important thing now is to bring back the information here intact. Green Real City, Corona Tower, Sky Realm. More than 100 counselors gathered in the meeting room, passing on the information sent from II Tower one after another. It seems that the war is coming much faster than we expected, Raphael murmured after reading the letter in his hand, then turned his head to look at Lin En and said with a sigh, "You have a group of good pilots, Master Lin En." The other members of the parliament also nodded. 5 civilians who could not do magic exchanged their lives for more than a dozen Griffin Knights. In a sense, their deaths were very valuable. The price of a new airship was only 2,000 magic gold coins, and the cost would be even lower. Lin En felt sorry for Hami and others. In his opinion, 5 skilled pilots were far more valuable than killing a few Griffin Knights. Now the speed of producing airships in Yaita's workshop is very fast, but the pilots are in short supply, and it is not easy to train them. I just saw the intelligence that the Holy See seems to have found a way to crack the hellfire, a member of the parliament said hesitantly. Hearing this, everyone present looked at Lin En. Due to the propaganda of the parliament and various rumors circulating in the market, they are very familiar with the legendary deeds of the magic star in front of them, and naturally they also know that the other party can create an immortal hellfire. When Lin En was still a 3-ring wizard, he used it to destroy half of the town. It was also used when he defeated the kingdom's elite army not long ago. These 2 records of destroying the army level are undoubtedly very hardcore, so this strange flame has almost become the symbol of this magic star. It is rumored that this thing was summoned by Lin En from the endless purgatory. This kind of flame will burn and devour people's skin and flesh. As long as it is contaminated with a little flame, it will be difficult to escape the fate of death. This time, the sacrifice of Hami and others can be exchanged for such a good record, and the white phosphorus shrapnel developed by Lin En also played an indispensable role. Raphael certainly did not believe that there would be any so-called hellfire, but he did not expect the Holy See to find a way to crack it so quickly. Chapter 330 Why don't you try my laser anti-aircraft gun? Under the gaze of the crowd, Lin En looked normal and spoke casually. Any magic can be cracked, and my white phosphorus fire is no exception. It was precisely because of this that he had been very careful to keep the information about white phosphorus after entering the wizard land. This thing can only bully the uneducated bishops in the Sekka's empire. If it dares to be used on a large scale in the wizard land, wizards will soon be able to replicate it. After all, phosphorus is not difficult to manufacture. In order to achieve large-scale production, he also handed over this technology to several trustworthy wizards in the Alchemy Research Institute. In fact, after breaking through the Great Wizard, the importance of white phosphorus to Lin En has been greatly reduced, because this thing is still a little short of the Great Wizard level battle. Apart from anything else, a vacuum field can greatly reduce its power. Even if white phosphorus fire is manufactured on a large scale, it is only equivalent to the power of the 4th or 5th ring magic. The characteristics of white phosphorus also determine that its upper limit will not be too high, But it doesn't matter. Among the many terrifying weapons recorded in the intelligent brain, white phosphorus bombs can only be described as mediocre. It is mainly because it is easier to make that he listed it as the first option. It just so happens that I have conceived a new and more powerful fire magic these days. It is time for it to be eliminated. Lin En said with emotion. White phosphorus fire was once his trump card and solved a lot of troubles for himself, but now it can't keep up with his growth. As a great wizard, he can easily do many things that he couldn't do before, such as making some combination elements with more complex chemical properties. For other wizards, creating a powerful new magic is by no means an easy task. It is common to spend years or even decades. But for Lin En, looking for information in the inventory of the intelligent brain, he can always get some inspiration. Raphael and others twitched their faces. There is actually a fire magic more powerful than the hellfire. They think this is outrageous enough. Lin En did not intend to explain more, but raised his hand and knocked on the conference table, pulling everyone's attention away from the white phosphorus fire. They had more important things to deal with. According to the intelligence that the pilots used telescopes to detect, the Imperial army that crossed the border this time should be more than 30,000. In addition to the Griffin Knights, there is also a special team of about 5,000 people. All of them are wearing bright silver armor. They don't look simple. And their leader is a man wearing an iron mask and a red and gold robe. His face can't be seen, and his age is unknown, Lin En said in a deep voice. Although the two had looked at each other across the sea in the harbor town, Lin En didn't have such good eyesight at that time, so he only knew that someone summoned the phantom of the goddess to stop the spread of the white phosphorus fire, but he didn't know who it was. The leader should be Edwell, a cardinal of the Holy See. It is rumored that he is highly regarded in the church and may even become the next chief judge. Herve explained. He often stayed in the wizard land and never went out, but this did not mean that the parliament had no spies in the empire. These basic intelligence were still clear. Last year, Green Real City was almost destroyed by those crazy doomsday believers. Herve learned from his mistakes and increased his investment in the intelligence system. However, it seems that the results are minimal now, because his spies told him 3 days ago that the Empire's army should still be gathering in the east, but the other side has turned around and rushed into the kingdom. If it weren't for the airships arranged by Lin En to monitor the border, I'm afraid they are still in the dark. Herve paused and continued. As for those silver-armored troops, they should be the Holy See's God's punishment army. Lin En frowned. Of course, he had heard of this most elite legion of the Holy See. It was rumored that all the members of this legion had been blessed by the gods and were extremely brave in battle. They were the elite among the elite. This is probably just a vanguard unit, Aurora reminded. They took over the entire kingdom. The battle in the capital also exposed part of the strength of the secret law society. No matter how arrogant the church is, it is impossible to send only such a small number of people, even if they are elite. The success of bad news made the counselors present look worried. The God's punishment army on the ground was not bad. No matter how elite they were, they had the capital to fight with the more advanced musket troops. But the Griffin Knights in the sky were a big problem that was difficult to solve. As long as they existed, the airships would not be able to take off and bomb. Their magic was also difficult to hit the Griffin Legion, which had extremely fast speed and reaction ability in the sky. It is impossible to let the airships rely on self-destruction every time, right? The intelligence said very clearly that this time the Griffin Knights wanted to seize control of the airships. They had such a good opportunity to capture the pilots alive. Otherwise, they could use divine magic to destroy them directly from a distance. Perhaps we can consider letting some shaping wizards transform into flying monsters to protect these airships. A great wizard suggested. Let them fight the griffins in the sky. Are you crazy? Sanchez angrily rebuked the other party's unrealistic idea, which was simply a joke with the life of the shaping wizard. Once the magic transformation is completed, the wizard will lose part of the ability to cast spells. It is difficult to defeat a powerful monster like a griffin in the sky alone, not to mention those griffin knights who can cooperate to cast divine spells. Do you have a better way to deal with it? The great wizard sneered and questioned. Although his idea is bound to cause great losses, It is also a solution. Sanchez choked and thought for a long time before he carefully suggested that they should not let the airship take off and give up air superiority. If those Griffin Knights dare to attack close to the ground, they should fight back fiercely with muskets and magic. Why not try lasers? Lin En suddenly said in the midst of everyone's discussion. The appearance of these Griffin Knights was also somewhat beyond his expectations. It was obviously too late to develop newer aircraft now, so why not try laser anti-aircraft guns? Laser? Aurora looked at Lin En in surprise, and then she reacted. You mean that new beam magic? Hervé and the others were suddenly enlightened. This was indeed a good idea. Aren't those Griffin Knights very fast and agile? But how fast can they be? As fast as light? That's a laser that travels nearly 300,000 kilometers per second and can circle the continent 7.5 times. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331. Even though there is, Lin En's words opened the door to a new world for everyone present. They had already experienced the power of laser magic in the experiment of measuring the speed of light a few days ago. It could only be described as terrifying, especially when the beam was shot out. No one could dodge it. However, it was not without disadvantages. The farther the distance, the weaker the intensity. The effective killing distance was about 300 to 400 meters. If you want to deal with griffins that can fly thousands of meters high, you must improve it again and strengthen the power of this thing. The congressman enthusiastically discussed the improvement plan of this beam magic. Since the understanding of optics was still in the primary stage, these improvement plans were only from the creation of more powerful light sources and how to focus them on one point. Raphael suggested that they could directly equip the airship with some wizards who can use light magic and launch attacks from the air, which would greatly shorten the distance. Lin En did not participate in the discussion, but he already had a corresponding plan in mind. The laser magic he mentioned was not just about gathering light. Laser is commonly known as the light emitted by stimulated atomic radiation. It is the energy released in the form of photons when the electrons in the atoms absorb energy and jump from low energy level to high energy level, and then fall back from high energy level to low energy level. It is known as the most accurate ruler and the fastest knife. The laser weapon technology of the Federation is also very perfect. All he needs to do is to transform the relevant theories into magic, which should be done in a few days. Sanchez, who did not participate in the discussion, was also not involved in the discussion. He was very interested in another thing. Master Lin En, I heard that in the battle of the Secret Law Society, to capture the capital, the Cardinal of the Kingdom summoned the projection of that false god. Is that true? Yes, Lin En nodded. Which legend from the Secret Society took action? Hervé asked curiously. He knew very well that even if it was just a projection of Ella, it had power beyond that of a great wizard, which was not something that Lin En and others could deal with. The wizards present were very curious about this. Although the Magic Daily described the final result of the battle, it did not mention the whole process in detail. Lin En shook his head and said calmly, in fact, the general plan for building the Magic Kingdom this time was agreed upon by Anthony and me. There were not many scholars involved, and it was not an order issued from within the Secret Society. In other words, there was no help from the legendary wizard? Hervé was very curious. How did they defeat the projection of the false god? Seeing that everyone asked, Lin En had no intention of hiding anything, and briefly talked about the battle of the capital. In the end, in order to destroy the support of the projection, he gathered the power of hundreds of former wizards and the six-ringed great wizard Anthony. Everyone used thunder magic to charge the special electromagnetic railgun, and then launched a legendary attack. Of course, after that shot, the electromagnetic railgun that was damaged by overload was sent for repair. You are really brave, Aurora said in amazement. When she heard Lin En talk about the Magic Kingdom plan before, she thought it was formulated by the leaders of the Secret Law Society. After all, splitting a kingdom from the most powerful place in the empire, Such a big move is really shocking. The most important thing is that Lin En and others really did it. Magic creator Vittorio was very interested in this electromagnetic weapon. He had used it once when facing August a year ago, and he still remembered its power. Fortunately, everything went smoothly, didn't it? Lin En said without comment. Now that he thought about it, the battle was indeed very thrilling. Although he had used the safest means and used the blessing of the sky and the terrain to directly kill Unluck, he did not expect that the other party had the ability to entrust the soul to others, and even summoned the projection of the goddess with the help of tens of thousands of devout believers. It was not until later that he learned from Hatra that the support used by Unluck to summon the phantom of God was a holy object that had been stored in the church for believers to worship. Fortunately, he prepared the electromagnetic railgun as a trump card in advance, otherwise it would be a bit difficult to hold back. Now the attention of the church was attracted as they expected. Since you have faced her projection and even fought with it, can you roughly determine her current state? Aurora asked solemnly. This is also the biggest variable in this war, and what they are most worried about. After winning the war of faith, Ella did something crazier than all the psychic wizards before. She created the church, proclaimed herself as the true God, forged the creation legend in the Bible, and after hundreds of years of domestication, turned the entire empire into a pasture of faith. No one knows how much her power has grown. Aurora also couldn't guess whether the other party had found a way to get rid of the pollution of the soul. And the so-called God's descent of the church, according to her guess, is probably a more powerful projection magic, using the holy relics of faith as an anchor to allow their will to descend. It's hard to say, but I think she should have been affected a lot. Lin En pondered for a long time. He had seen the projection of God twice, and he was very impressed by him. These incarnations all exuded a sense of holiness and mercy. As for whether the other party has been completely corrupted by faith, Lin En did not dare to make a decision easily. But what is certain is that the incarnation they are facing does lack some of the necessary agility, which is also an important reason why the electromagnetic cannon can hit. Lin En told all his inferences and the details he observed. Several legendary speakers were obviously relieved. What they were most worried about was that Ella had found a way to get rid of soul pollution. Although hundreds of years of accumulation and tens of millions of believers in the empire can provide the other party with unimaginable magic blessing, the most important thing for wizards is the accumulation of knowledge. This is the essence of wizards' power. Aurora couldn't imagine how terrifying an opponent who had lived for 800 or 900 years, harvested countless people's souls as food, and had rationality would be. That is definitely an enemy that no one wants to face. Not to mention relying on the power of the parliament, even with the help of the secret law society, they may not be able to defeat such a monster. Chapter 332. The frightened Hatra and the rebellious kingdom nobles. This is the best news we have ever received, Rf said in a relaxed tone. If Ella's magic level was still at the level of several hundred years ago, then they would be able to defeat her together. Don't take it lightly, Rf, Vittorio reminded. Regardless of the strength of Ella's original body, the church alone is not so easy to deal with. After hundreds of years of development, it has become a behemoth. On the surface, they have to face at least 5 legendary enemies. Lin En also nodded. The projection of the god before showed some kind of power that seemed to be able to distort space and even slow down time, which made him extremely concerned. This is just an incarnation. I don't know how powerful Ella's original body will be. The discussion on the war lasted for a whole morning, and the parliament's response was also extremely fast, and the order of the war was quickly conveyed. More than 200 airships assembled in the evening and sailed off in a mighty manner. The 4 ironclad ships docked at the port of Aida also blew their horns and sailed away under the attention of the townspeople. The war is about to start. Mary looked at the airships and the huge ironclad fleet that covered the sky, muttered to herself, and was somewhat worried. War is a strange word for the townspeople of Aida, who have been at peace for a long time, but in the past, sailors from the Secus Empire would also describe to them the tragic scenes of the lords attacking each other in the tavern. Mary could only silently hope in her heart that they could win this war. But on the airships and ironclad ships, it was a different scene. The musketeers who had been sent to the kingdom to perform missions were bragging about how they easily defeated those iron cans charging in iron armor, and there were no casualties throughout the whole process. One lucky musketeer even became a lord of a large territory because he killed a prince. Others who made great contributions in the war to occupy the capital also received a lot of rewards. Old York was no exception, because he was very brave in the battle. He followed Dreddle and others to seize the city gate. His rank was upgraded from an ordinary private to a non-commissioned officer who could lead a team, and he was also rewarded with 10 magic gold coins. For Old York, who was still a hunter 2 years ago, 10 magic gold coins were undoubtedly a huge sum of money. He had never seen what the gold coins looked like before, but now he saw that they were not only glittering, but also engraved with extremely beautiful patterns. These gold coins can be exchanged for piles of wheat, which can feed him for most of his life. But now Old York is no longer satisfied with just having enough food. He now has higher aspirations. In addition to becoming a higher-ranking lieutenant, he also wanted to buy a beautiful alchemical internal combustion car, and even send his children to civilian schools. In the future, he might be able to join the Alchemical Research Institute and become an assistant to the wizards. These were things that Old York never dared to think about in the past, but now they have become something that seems to be within his reach. In addition, Yaita has recently opened a lot of factories and produced many new and strange things, which made Old York very excited. For example, there is a thing called an electric light, which can make the night as bright as the day, which is much better than candles. Now it has become a new fashion in Yaita. All of this needs to be captured on the battlefield. He is still very confident in his marksmanship. He can definitely hit whatever he points to within 70 meters. This time, you have to look carefully. Don't let those bastards get ahead of you again. Old York clenched the new musket in his hand and muttered to himself. When the whole city was searching for the prince, Old York was lucky enough to run into him, but he was robbed of the credit by a young man whose shooting skills were much worse than his. Otherwise, he would have been the one who got a large piece of land and became the lord. The next day, at noon, in the palace of the royal capital of Hadratha, a group of nobles of the kingdom gathered here, but they were silent like wooden men. The new King Hatcher was furious and kept cursing. These bastards! Damn! Hatcher had received the news of the entry of the Imperial Army 3 days ago. At first, he didn't care much. In order to deal with this war, the kingdom's army had already assembled. However, the development of things far exceeded his expectations. The border lords of the entire Eastern Kingdom turned against them one after another, and had no intention of resisting at all. So in just 3 days, they had already entered the heart of the kingdom and quickly took over the control of several cities. Not only that, the lords of the northern border of the kingdom were also ready to move, and several border earls blatantly refused the kingdom's call for conscription. How could Hatcher not be angry? He even felt a hint of fear in his heart. Those nobles who said they were loyal to him suddenly changed their faces, which led to the fact that the 50,000 troops that were expected to be assembled to fight against the Empire only barely gathered about 30,000 in the end, and most of them were serfs who were temporarily recruited and lacked training. In Hatcher's hysterical roar, nobles such as Gad who were loyal to the king showed worries, but many people were watching the joke. They scoffed at the so-called War of Independence. Once the army of the church arrived, all resistance would be in vain. It was just that Hatcher put them under house arrest in the capital, so they had to obey the order. The next moment, the closed door of the hall was opened, and at the same time, there was a voice that made everyone present familiar and fearful. "Please relax, Your Majesty Hatcher. They are just some lords who cannot see the situation clearly. As long as we defeat the legions of the church, we can slowly settle accounts later." "Sir Lin, Master Anthony, you are finally here." Hatcher looked at the gate and said with surprise. In the hall, the nobles who had their own thoughts shuddered after seeing Lin's figure, and hurriedly put away their little thoughts. Just over a month ago, They witnessed how the other party raised his hand to attract the sky and destroyed thousands of the kingdom's guards with one blow. The other party even killed the god who came in the form of an incarnation under the witness of tens of thousands of townspeople in the capital. The young wizard in front of them has become the most powerful and terrifying wizard in their hearts. Chapter 333, The Military Parade That Shocked the Kingdom. Happy New Year, Your Majesty. We are late. Please forgive us. Lin En nodded slightly, giving the new king enough face. And Hatara was like a traveler who grabbed a life-saving straw in despair, and hurriedly spoke. Sir Lin En, now the army of the church has entered the kingdom. We must organize people as soon as possible to drive them out of the scene. Please be patient, Your Majesty. Lin En slowly comforted the impatient Hatara. It must be said that compared with his father, King Basil, the second prince's cultivation and temperament are really far behind. As for the nobles who turned against the kingdom in the east, Lin En was not surprised at all. After all, the power of the church has been operating in the kingdom for a long time, and they just took advantage of the situation to occupy the capital, which is not enough to convince the people. Such a situation is within his expectations. Lin En looked around at the nobles with different thoughts on the field and spoke slowly. The reinforcements from the land of wizards have probably arrived. If you are interested, why not go and have a look? Then I would like to see it. Marquis Morton said mockingly. A few years ago, he had the honor of seeing the God's Punishment Army returning from the crusade against the alien demons in the Holy City. They can only be described as invincible. It is said that the personnel of the God's Punishment Army are all selected from the elite of the army, and even from the witch hunters. All of them are knights who have received the grace of God. It is no exaggeration to say that only 3,000 or 4,000 people can sweep the entire kingdom. Add to that the precious Griffin Knights, who are priests per capita. What kind of army can compete with the church? Under the leadership of Lin En, King Hatter and a group of nobles walked out of the palace hall. As soon as he went out, Morton had already noticed something wrong, because there was no warm sunshine outside, but a dark place. It's dark. Is it already night? Gad, who had been promoted to duke, said at a loss, and a noble next to him looked at the sky in horror. Look up in the sky. Everyone present raised their heads and saw an extremely shocking scene. Hundreds of airships were floating in the sky at an altitude of 100 meters. Each one was as big as a house. They were connected together to cover the sky, and the shadows cast spread to the entire palace, creating a strange scene that it was afternoon, but it seemed like night was coming. Although Lin En had used airships in the war to destroy the elite of the kingdom, this was the first time that this thing was really unveiled in front of everyone. The shock brought by this huge flying object was self-evident. Even Morton, who had been mocking before, was now speechless with horror. Let's go. They will land in the square. Lin En's shouting woke up the dazed nobles from their dreams. When they arrived at the square, these airships had already parked neatly in the huge square. The army from the mysterious wizard land was completely different from what they had known before. The composition of this army was extremely strange. No one held a sword or a gun, and no one used a crossbow. Rows and rows of musketeers in formal attire walked down from the airship under the gaze of the crowd, and their bright bayonets shone brightly under the scorching sun. Morton and others frowned. Since the Battle of the Capital for more than a month, they had collected a lot of intelligence, and naturally they could recognize that these people were holding a strange weapon called a musket. The power was enough to penetrate iron armor at a distance of 100 steps, and the sound when firing was like thunder. Morton had always thought that the 3,000 musket teams that captured the capital were the limit of what these devils believers could bring out. After all, this kind of alchemical equipment should be difficult to make. Unexpectedly, there were so many of them that they could equip a legion of 10,000 people. What concerned him more was the strange-looking iron lumps that were carried down from the airship. Such heavy things, without horses or camels to carry them, were able to move forward freely. Morton had no idea where the power of these things came from, and could only guess that it was the evil magic of those wizards. For this first battle with the Holy See, both Lin En and the Parliament attached great importance to it. They could only win and not lose, otherwise all their previous efforts would be in vain. Lin En brought almost everything he could: artillery, alchemical armored vehicles, electromagnetic rail guns, and the ironclad ships sailing on the sea. However, due to the limited carrying capacity of the airship, this was only the first wave of supporting troops, totaling about 12,000 people. Even such a small military parade was shocking enough for Morton and others. "Sir Lin En, I wonder what these strange steel boxes are used for?" King Hatch asked curiously. What he could think of was naturally to rush these iron boxes on the battlefield, but he knew it was not that simple just by thinking with his knees pointed at by those hideous gun barrels. They even inexplicably felt like they were facing death. "You will know it in a few days." Lin En smiled, not intending to reveal anything. The great nobles of these kingdoms were all forced to stay in the capital by them, so that Hatcher could take control of most of the kingdom in a short period of time. Who knows if anyone could get past their surveillance and secretly reveal information about them to the church. The reason for holding such a blatant military parade is just to stabilize the situation, so that some people will not have any tricks, causing chaos within the kingdom and causing a situation of internal and external difficulties. Those newer weapons naturally cannot easily reveal information. Now it seems that the effect is probably pretty good. Lin En's eyes swept across the frightened faces of the nobles, and then looked at the people who were watching from afar. Lin En's deliberate concealment made Hatcher, as the king, somewhat dissatisfied, but he knew more clearly that the kingdom of Hadjarata must rely on these wizards to fight against the church, so he could only suppress the slight dissatisfaction in his heart. After the short military parade, Lin En handed over the laser launcher blueprints that he had prepared long ago to Anthony, asking the master of electromagnetism to study it, and it would be best if it could be manufactured as soon as possible to catch up with the next war. As for Lin En himself, he returned to the mansion arranged for him by Hatcher, preparing to develop new fire magic. This time he did not appear in the kingdom of Hadjarata, in the form of a magic projection, but came in person. In order to support this war, the parliament sent a full 1,000 wizards to the capital, including several great wizards. Even the legendary speakers would take action when necessary. As the planner, he was the hub of the land of wizards and the Society of Mysticism, so he was naturally no exception. Chapter 334 Lin En, the real eternal fire of hell, chlorine trifluoride. Lin En went into the depths of the mansion alone, and after ordering Alok and others, as well as the servants and guards in the manor not to disturb him, he silently said in his mind, 071, show my current status. Agreement target, Lin En physical activity, high magic scale, 485 mental power rating, Great Wizard, 4th ring, spell slots, white phosphorus touch of flame, liquid nitrogen ice field, secondary magic protection, mage shield, magic barrier, secondary deflection field, 4th ring, space vibration, iron sandstorm, electromagnetic gun, 3 times the speed of sound, deflection field, advanced projection, vacuum field, slow barrier. Magic field users, 43 people. After being promoted to a great wizard, Lin En found that his magic power increased to about 5 times the original, and his computing power also increased synchronously, and his control over the elements was improved to a higher level. Compared with other great wizards, he didn't master many 4-ring magics, only 7 in total. Among them, vacuum magic and slow barrier were considered as a kind of application of the domain they possessed, and they were means that most great wizards knew. For the other kinds of magic, the magic consumption of space vibration was very high, and it was considered a short and medium-range armor-piercing and highly lethal magic. The electromagnetic cannon was used by Lin En to make up for the shortcomings of long-range combat. It was powerful and fast, and it only took 1 or 2 seconds to prepare. In the battle at the Great Wizard level, he still lacked a large-scale, quick-release magic to suppress the opponent. Although the 4th ring spell, Iron Sandstorm, was very good, it was powerful after being blessed with thunder magic, and it was also considered to be in the upper ranks among the 4-ring spells, but it was obviously not satisfactory to Lin En. You have to know that before he became a great wizard, this position had always been dominated by white phosphorus fire. For low-ring wizards and bishops who could not create a vacuum domain, White phosphorus fire could only be described as a nightmare. What Lin En planned to prepare this time was something that could replace white phosphorus, a compound that even the notorious terrorists find dangerous and dare not equip their army with, and the worst terrorists are afraid of it. Its name is chlorine trifluoride. If there is anything that can deserve the title of hellfire, white phosphorus can barely hang a little hook, then chlorine trifluoride is well deserved. This kind of toxic and highly corrosive inorganic compound has a boiling point of 11.3 C and a melting point of -76.3 C. It is a colorless gas at room temperature and will turn into a green liquid when cooled. Its main use is as aviation rocket fuel and nuclear fuel processing and post-processing. It is not flammable by itself, but it will react violently with substances. In a sense, chlorine trifluoride is an upgraded version of white phosphorus. It has many characteristics of white phosphorus, and it is more powerful and terrifying. At least white phosphorus fire can be suppressed by water. It will not burn at low temperatures until the temperature rises and it will reignite. It will also be buried by non-combustible materials such as sand. However, these methods used to deal with white phosphorus flames are useless in front of chlorine trifluoride, because this thing can even burn metal, solid concrete and sand. Yes, it really burns, not like the slow corrosion of white phosphorus. Chlorine trifluoride will immediately produce a super high temperature explosion when it encounters water. It can only be described as unreasonable. Because fluorine and chlorine are both highly electronegative elements, once the two are combined, they will madly plunder nearby electrons. And we all know that elements are composed of atomic nuclei and electrons, so theoretically any substance can be transformed into nutrients for chlorine trifluoride. This is the real eternal flame and hellfire. Once this thing burns in the laboratory, the only hope is to run quickly to the upwind direction immediately after discovery, because there is no effective way to put it out. The reason why Lin En didn't make this thing before was because chlorine trifluoride is extremely unstable. It is really possible to burn yourself out of control when casting magic with it as the core. This is also the reason why chlorine trifluoride is extremely powerful, but it has not been made into a weapon to dominate the battlefield. There are many people who have tried to do this in history, but there is no doubt that they have suffered a great loss in the transportation link. Even if this thing is placed in a specially treated metal container, it is not 100% safe. But now Lin En has been promoted to a great wizard, and his control over magic and elements has been greatly improved, so he dares to try to control this extremely dangerous compound. Lin En retrieved all the information about chlorine trifluoride in his brain, and the chemical formula for its preparation can be seen from the name. Cl2 plus 3F2 equals 2Clf3. After carefully reviewing the precautions annotated in red several times, Lin En closed his eyes and began to synthesize complex elements. The magic power in the surrounding area surged rapidly, creating a vacuum area to prevent chlorine trifluoride from getting out of control. This is probably the only way to control it. Prevent chlorine trifluoride from contacting other substances. Of course, it doesn't require oxygen to ignite this thing. It can still burn when it touches an object in a vacuum state, because it is essentially plundering electrons. In the divided vacuum field, Lin En opened the two jars, and the fluorine and chlorine elements were stored inside. The two soon floated out and suspended in the field under the control of mental power. Lin En was extremely careful and forcibly bound all the elements in a palm-sized space, allowing them to contact and collide with each other. With the power of a great wizard, it is far from being able to control a certain element very accurately, such as making them completely stop and achieve magic similar to stopping time within a certain range. The wizard can only guide the direction of the elements through mental power, such as left or right, or use magic to force them to slow down as much as possible and maintain a state of laziness. Whether it is forcibly creating a vacuum field or controlling the elements to contact and collide with each other in a specific proportion, the consumption of magic power and mental power is not a small amount. If Lin En was still a three-ring wizard, he would face the embarrassing situation of mental power drying up in just a few seconds. Fortunately, he has now completed the promotion, and this level of consumption is still within an acceptable range. Even so, Lin En struggled for an entire afternoon, and after several attempts, he finally synthesized what he wanted. A strange element appeared in Lin En's palm, with 4 elements tightly stuck together, forming a T-shape, with 1 short bond and 2 long bonds. This is chlorine trifluoride, one of the most dangerous compounds. P.S. On the first day of the new year, I wish you all a bright future, smooth academic career, rolling in wealth, good luck, great fortune, and happiness. Happy New Year. Chapter 335, Defeated Lin En. This dangerous and terrifying compound was suspended in his palm at this moment. A smile appeared on Lin En's slightly tired face, and then he cast a magic spell, Advanced Material Deconstruction. The magic power was like a shark that smelled blood. Under the control of mental power, it rushed up and wrapped up the chlorine trifluoride. It doesn't react, Lin En murmured secretly, but think about it, this is normal. Magic power has no electrons, so of course it won't be plundered. While thinking, magic power had already flowed into chlorine trifluoride, engraving its structure and characteristics, and then the replication began. Lin En simultaneously released the vacuum field. After contacting the rest of the substances, chlorine trifluoride immediately revealed its horror, and the hot and slightly weird flames quickly burned. Under Lin En's perception, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen and various rare elements in the air were soon all swept into the hell flame. Chlorine trifluoride was like a glutton that had no scruples and could never be satisfied. It madly swallowed all the elements close to itself and turned them into its own nutrients. In just a few seconds, the spark that was originally only the size of a finger quickly expanded to the size of a fist, accompanied by a large amount of poisonous gas. This is also the second characteristic of chlorine trifluoride. When it reacts with other substances, it will produce highly toxic gas, which is somewhat similar to white phosphorus. Let's call it the eternal flame. Lin En touched his chin. This thing needs a name after all. Calling it chlorine trifluoride is a bit too straightforward, which is basically equivalent to introducing oneself. After confirming that the characteristics of chlorine trifluoride are indeed the same as those recorded in the intelligent brain, Lin En began to try to use it. Since these chlorine trifluorides are all mimicked by magic, they can be controlled freely like other magic, but the difficulty will be slightly higher. After all, the electrons plundered by chlorine trifluoride are real, and it takes extra mental energy to control. As for whether it can counter magic and divine arts as he imagined, it is an unknown. This is a problem that needs to be verified urgently. After dinner, Lin En asked Anthony, who was studying the laser launcher, to come and propose a stopgap magic battle to test the power of the new magic. Anthony also agreed with interest. The location was chosen in the open training ground in this manner. After receiving the news, Alok and others dropped their work. They were very interested in the new magic of the Dean. Even Raphael and his companions were no exception. What do you think is the chance of winning for Master Lin En? Sanchez asked his colleagues beside him quietly. Less than 10%. Dennis thought for a moment and replied thoughtfully. You know, Anthony is a 6-ring wizard, only one step away from the legendary realm, and he has also developed a unique electromagnetic magic. And Lin En just completed the promotion some time ago. 4 rings versus 6 rings. This gap cannot be made up by 1 or 2 novel magics. In fact, if Anthony's opponent was not this magic star, I am afraid that even this 10% chance of winning would not exist. That may not be the case. Raphael shook his head and did not agree with Dennis's inference. Don't forget, Master Lin almost killed August. He had fought side by side with Lin against the Doomsday cultists. At that time, Lin, who was only a 3-ring wizard, developed a powerful space magic, which helped him defeat the infiltrated Vatican insider in the magic field, and almost killed August, who might have already set foot in the legend, with an electromagnetic cannon. But if I remember correctly, it should be Lady Aurora who was secretly helping him that time? A great wizard reminded him. In his opinion, this magic star was just lucky to have picked up a merit for nothing. No matter who comes, as long as there is the help of the legendary speakers, it is not a difficult task to resolve the riots in Greenreal City. Compared with Sanchez and others who stood outside to comment and measure the victory or defeat based on the strength of both sides, Anthony, who was among them, looked extremely solemn. He knew that the person standing opposite him was not an ordinary four-ring wizard, but a former legend. Even if his power has not been restored now, he is definitely not so easy to deal with. Anthony vaguely felt the blood that had been immersed in his body for a long time begin to boil, facing the legendary wizard in his prime. He was definitely not an opponent, but now he could take this opportunity to see the power of the legend. "Can we start, Master Lin En?" Anthony asked. He did not rashly call Lin En a teacher in front of outsiders. After all, he had not yet cracked the complicated Maxwell equations and truly gained the other party's recognition. "Of course," Lin En said casually, not knowing that Anthony, who was caught in his own imagination, had begun to take it seriously. Since breaking through the realm, this was the first time he fought against a real great wizard. Although he had fought with Helrim and August before, he either took advantage of the other party or relied on the help of others. This time, he really relied on his own strength to fight against a six-ring wizard. The moment Lin En nodded in response, Anthony raised his hand, and when his lips moved slightly, a touch of blue-purple lightning appeared at his fingertips. Thunderbolt. This is just a four-ring magic, but its advantage is that it is cast very quickly. Almost at the moment when the fingertips were raised, the flashing lightning was like a ferocious lightning snake, rushing towards Lin En. However, the flashing lightning was firmly bounded 3 meters away from the body, and Lin En, who was in it, was not hurt at all. This is naturally a Faraday cage. Fighting with Anthony, who is proficient in thunder magic, Lin En will not be unprepared. Anthony's face did not change, and his mind moved. Mixed in the flashing electric light, those undetectable metal elements instantly became a killing weapon, gathered together, and quickly extended outward. The whole process took only a moment, and Lin En, who was standing in front of him, was nailed to the spot by several huge and sharp copper nails that came out of the lightning. "Dean." Looking at Lin En, whose body was pierced by copper nails, Alok shouted in panic, and Pierce and others were no exception, with horror on their faces. They had no idea that it was just a magic experiment, but Anthony would suddenly kill him in front of everyone. P.S. The next chapter will be a little later, around 1 o'clock, and I suddenly found some problems that need to be revised. Chapter 336. The Eternal Flame that Devours Everything. The great wizards were not as shocked as Alok and his companions. They could see that the copper nails had all avoided the vital points, but they just looked scary. The lethality of high-level magic is usually very amazing. In a battle at the great wizard level, it is not easy to be able to hold back to this extent. After all, no one knows what kind of magic the other party has mastered and whether they can defend against it. Is this thunder magic? It is indeed extraordinary. Sanchez frowned. The thunderbolt that Anthony just cast was too fast. Even he might not be able to react. But Raphael did not expect that the battle would end so quickly. It lasted about 1 second before and after, then the winner was decided directly. He thought that it would at least last for a while and he could enjoy a wonderful battle. The gap in strength is still too big after all. Do you think this looks like the end? This is clearly just the beginning. Dennis on the side reminded him unhappily. After Dennis's reminder, everyone present noticed that Lin En, who was pierced by the copper nail, looked normal. There was no trace of pain on his face. There was no blood flowing out of the pierced part, but it was burning. Yes, it was literally burning. The scorching flames rushed out from the surface of the body. Lin En's clothes, skin, and flesh were all dismembered and turned into fuel for the flames. Not only that, the flames were rapidly expanding and engulfing everything around, whether it was the yellow-orange copper nails or the lightning. Anthony's pupils shrank slightly, because he felt that his control magic was taken away. Not only that, these fires were actually devouring lightning, breath of flames. Before Anthony could think clearly, Lin En's voice came from behind the flames. From the moment the battle began, he used polarizing magic, and what remained in place was just a ball of magic projection. The scorching eternal flame devoured everything along the way, and in the continuous expansion, it turned into a rolling wave of fire and rushed towards Anthony. Vacuum field. Anthony looked solemn, and the field around him quickly expanded in all directions, stripping away all the elements. The magic power in his body quickly transformed into a water curtain barrier, blocking in front of him. As long as there is no air, the flame will naturally go out. And water is the nemesis of fire. This is undoubtedly common sense among common sense, and Raphael and others who were watching also felt so. But at this moment this common sense was invalid. After entering the vacuum field, the eternal flame was still burning fiercely. Not only that, at the moment it hit the water curtain, the eternal flame was not extinguished, but instead swallowed the water curtain, bursting out with high temperature and explosion like the sun. Anthony's face changed drastically, and he retreated again and again. As his mind turned, the magic power spontaneously transformed into various elements, but whether it was the protective shield composed of metal elements, or the wall of sand and soil, or the electromagnetic barrier, they all lost their effectiveness. The only difference between them is that they will be transformed into nutrients earlier or later and be devoured by the flames. In a flash, Anthony was already engulfed in the sea of fire, and only the last barrier made of snake scales remained around him. He could sense that the power of the barrier was constantly weakening, while the power of the flames was rapidly increasing. In such a cycle, his strongest defense would be broken in at most half a minute. As expected of a former legend, he actually mastered such a terrible fire magic. Anthony sighed in his heart, forcing himself into danger so easily. But Anthony did not mean to admit defeat, because there was another way to win, that is to attack the caster directly. However, he had tried 17 elements, and no matter which one, it was difficult to escape the erosion of the flames. The rest were probably no exception, but there was another more special element that should be effective, that was light. This thought flashed through Anthony's mind, and the next moment a pure white beam of light rushed out of the rolling waves of fire and pierced Lin's body again. Obviously, this is another magical projection. Since learning the advanced projection technique, Lin En has worked hard on it. And of course, he has mastered it very well. Under the cover of the eternal flame, Anthony couldn't carefully sense where Lin En's true body was, but he didn't need to do so, because nothing could be faster than light. Under the sweep of the laser, the iron railings and wooden stakes placed on the training ground were instantly cut off, and the cuts were extremely smooth, even leaving a deep scratch on the wall in the distance. "Stop! Stop!" Raphael shouted in horror. Anthony swept the laser across, and they didn't know what happened to Lin En. Raphael didn't worry about his own safety. They were outside the battlefield and could still resist the weakened laser, but former wizards like Halak might only have half of their bodies left. Amid Raphael's exclamation, the dazzling laser stopped quickly. Lin En also knew that this training ground could not withstand their tossing, so he cast a spell with unsatisfied intention to extinguish the burning flames. The eternal flame covering Anthony's body was quickly suppressed, but to Lin's surprise, there were still many flames attached to various places in the training ground, with some signs of being out of control. Lin could not help but frown. Unlike white phosphorus, chlorine trifluoride itself cannot burn. It relies on plundering the electrons of other elements to form a combustion phenomenon, that is, flame is its derivative. In the previous experiment, he only created a fist-sized eternal flame, and he could control it freely with his mental power. Now, after swallowing a huge amount of nutrients, it has gone out of control. Lin thought about it and could only use the purest magic power to forcibly peel off the places eroded by the flames, let them float in the vacuum field, and slowly burn out. He has been secretly alert in his heart. He must be more careful when using this kind of magic in the future. The power of this thing is indeed terrifying, and it can even suppress a six-ring wizard like Anthony, but if you are not careful, it may backfire on itself. It is a double-edged sword. At least with his current mental power, it is not enough to completely control this dangerous element. After the surrounding flames were peeled off and extinguished, Anthony secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He almost thought he was going to be buried in the sea of fire. Raphael and others walked onto the bumpy training ground together, and Sanchez couldn't wait to ask, "Master Lin En, was that really fire magic you used just now, or was it just a visual deception spell? I just saw it seemed to be burning in a vacuum." Chapter 337 Impossible. My 3 laws of fire can't be wrong. There were many people who had the same idea as Sanchez. After all, they had just watched the entire battle and witnessed all kinds of incredible and even unreasonable things in person, so they couldn't help but wonder if this was some kind of powerful visual illusion. After all, fire can't burn lightning, and it's even more impossible to turn a water curtain into fuel. Of course this is a kind of fire, Lin En said without hesitation. So there really is hell? Raphael asked in disbelief. He immediately thought of the rumors in the wizard's land that this magic star possessed a kind of fire from the deepest part of hell that could burn and devour everything. Raphael had always sneered at this statement before, but now he was a little skeptical, because apart from the fire of hell, he couldn't find a second adjective. Hell is just something the Vatican made up. I didn't expect you to believe this too, Lin En said with a smile, and after a pause, he continued to speak. Of course it's not what you think. I call it the eternal flame, a flame created by magic, but this is not magic at all. It completely violates my 3 laws of flame. This kind of flame can never exist. A great wizard couldn't help but refute loudly. Lin En looked at him strangely, and Raphael hurriedly introduced him. This is Master Adela, who has extremely high attainments in elemental science. Is it the Master Adela who proposed the theory of fire element? Lin En suddenly realized that he had met him several times at the previous gathering of great wizards, but they didn't have in-depth exchanges. Yes, it's me. Adela nodded proudly. He has studied the fire element for decades and summarized many characteristics and laws about fire. Among them are the 3 laws of fire: temperature, the speed of movement of the element, combustibles and sufficient oxygen. All fires cannot exist independently without these elements, and the fire element exists in every combustible material, but it is smaller than normal elements, so wizards cannot perceive it through mental power. It will only appear under the promotion of high temperature and oxygen. Adela was quite pleased with himself when he told Lin En about his theory of fire elements. This was the conclusion he had drawn after rigorous research and countless experiments. It was because of this that he defeated the phlogiston theory and the fire magic theory in the argument about what flames are 20 years ago, and won the silver moon medal. The flame that Lin En had just summoned completely violated these 3 laws. For example, burning in a vacuum violated the fact that flames need sufficient oxygen to exist. Metals and sandstone are not flammable materials. But strange combustion phenomena appeared, so this must be fake. It must be a visual illusion. After listening to Adela's analysis and the so-called theory of fire elements, Lin En was a little amused. This so-called 3 laws of fire are somewhat similar to the 3 elements of combustion in the previous life. However, it is already very impressive to be able to study to this extent. The discussion about the nature of fire in the previous life lasted for thousands of years, and it was not until modern times that a conclusion was reached. Lin En did not explain much, but stretched out his hand directly, and a ball of scorching flame soon ignited. This is the eternal flame. The wizards present could not help but feel a palpitation, but still took a few steps closer, looking at the fist-sized flame with great curiosity. Anthony looked solemn. He had just experienced the powerlessness of facing this strange flame. It seemed that everything was the most delicious nutrient for it. Adela even stretched out his hand to verify the truth personally, but was stopped by Lin En. If he was burned by this thing, he had no good way. The only solution was to peel off the contacted flesh. If it took a little longer, cutting off the hand would be a light punishment. Even if he was not dead, he would have to peel off a layer of skin. Although he was not able to really touch it in the end, Adela clearly felt the huge heat. At such a close distance, he did not believe that the other party could hide his magic perception, so he immediately cut off a section of the iron railing and placed it on the eternal flame. The slender iron railing burned in full view of everyone. It was not like melting after encountering high temperature, but it was actually burning. The flame was spreading along the slender railing. Adela was unwilling to give up and used the mage's hand to grab a solid stone. As a result, even the stone was burning. The last was the vacuum experiment, so everyone saw a strange sight, a stone burning in a vacuum. If something looks like fire and acts like fire, then no matter how strange it is undoubtedly fire. This is impossible. Stone can never be used as fuel. This shouldn't be right. And why can it burn without oxygen? Adela muttered to herself, puzzled and almost crazy. Raphael and others looked at Adela with pity. They all knew that Adela had devoted most of his life to the study of fire elements. Now he suddenly found that the theories he studied were all wrong. This blow was enough to make anyone collapse. But Lin En suddenly spoke at this time. In fact, your 3 laws of fire are very good, and there is no big problem. Adela paused, both surprised and confused, and almost thought that he had heard it wrong. But before he could ask, Lin En continued to explain. But I need to correct a few points. For example, oxygen is indeed a sufficient condition for the combustion reaction, but it is not a necessary condition. To be precise, as long as there is an oxidant, it is enough. Hearing this, everyone present frowned. Sufficient condition and necessary condition. These 2 new words seemed a little unfamiliar to several people, but they could still understand them reluctantly. But they didn't understand this oxidant. Oxidant is a substance that obtains electrons in the redox reaction. For example, chlorine trifluoride is a very strong oxidant and fluorinating agent, which directly replaces the role of oxygen. This is one of the reasons why it can burn as long as it contacts a substance, fuel, in a vacuum. However, there are not many elements that can be used as oxidants, and most of them are compounds. In view of the limited knowledge of Raphael and others, Lin En did not give a long explanation, otherwise he would have to explain what the redox reaction is first, and then start to talk about the internal structure of atoms. So after considering for a moment, Lin En spoke as briefly as possible. In layman's terms, certain elements can replace oxygen as a condition for igniting flames, so they can continue to burn even in an oxygen-free environment. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338, The Insidious Cardinal Adloyer. I know, just like the sun. The sun can also burn in a vacuum, Lydia said hurriedly. When Lin En was teaching them astronomy, he mentioned this strange phenomenon, but he didn't explain the reason. Lin En shook his head with a smile. The light of the sun is not produced by burning, but comes from nuclear fusion inside the sun. Light and heat are just appearances. However, the example given by Lydia is very suitable for understanding. Adela immediately understood that it is not that combustion does not require oxygen, but that other elements can be used as a substitute. So that's it. In fact, he had done similar experiments before, but the dozens of elements used in the experiment could not replace the role of oxygen, so he came to the conclusion that oxygen is necessary for combustion. But why can stone and metal also be used as fuel? Lin En did not intend to continue explaining. After extinguishing the eternal flame in his palm, he turned his head and looked at Anthony, smiling and said, "Master Anthony, I didn't expect you to be so fast. It's only been a few hours since you perfected the laser magic." He remembered that he had handed the relevant drawings to Anthony in the morning. It can be said that the development of the 2 magics started almost at the same time. It's just a prototype, and it's far from perfect, Anthony said with emotion. This kind of laser magic, which Lin En called the elemental excited state, has a total of 5 energy levels. He can only produce lasers of the 3rd energy level for the time being. In addition, there is a second way to enhance the power of lasers, which is to compress the diameter. The finer the diameter of the laser, the stronger its destructive power. After he compressed the laser from 5 mm to 0.5 mm, the power also increased several times, and the destructive power was roughly equivalent to the level of 5-ring magic. It can be further compressed, almost endlessly. In Anthony's view, this is a magic with no upper limit. As long as it is compressed to a fine enough level, it will definitely reach the level of legendary magic. I just don't know which legend wrote this elemental excited state theory, Anthony asked curiously. The person who proposed this theory can only be described as having a profound understanding of the elements. This is what I developed based on Glenn's focusing magic and combined with the element structure theory in the Secret Society. Lin En explained casually. When measuring the elements before, he said that the research on light, secret society, was also in its infancy. Now it was not good to slap himself in the face, so Lin En could only helplessly take the credit on himself. Raphael and others didn't know what to say. During this period of time after the seminar, this magic star not only created the terrifying fire magic, but also had the leisure to study and transform laser magic. The gap between people is even greater than that between people and dogs. Speaking of which, who won this battle? Sanchez suddenly asked without thinking. For Sanchez, who is a practical man, discussing these magic theories is far less important than arguing about winning or losing. The situation on the field was very dangerous just now, and it was just when the victory was about to be decided. But it was a pity that Raphael stopped it. Sanchez's words undoubtedly attracted everyone's attention. Lin En's fire magic was terrifying, but Anthony's laser magic was also impossible to dodge under the sweep. Of course I lost. Anthony responded with a normal look. He couldn't stop the eternal flame, but Lin En might not be unable to stop his laser magic. After all, the principle of this magic was what Lin En told him, and there must be a way to counter it. Anthony was very open-minded. Facing a former legend, it was normal to lose. The only thing he didn't expect was that he would lose so quickly. Anthony admitted so readily that Raphael and others were somewhat surprised. Then they all looked at Lin En. A 4-ring wizard defeated a 6-ring wizard, which was an almost overwhelming victory. If it were told to others, not many people would be willing to believe it. Since there is no result, let's just treat it as a draw. Lin En didn't mean to take advantage of Anthony. He didn't care about winning or losing. He was satisfied that he could fight with him and figure out that the properties of chlorine trifluoride were the same as he thought. It was difficult to prove the winner of the battle between wizards until the last moment. After all, no one knew what kind of strange magic the other party could come up with. The outcome of the battle was just lightly revealed, which made Sanchez, who was originally interested, feel bored and had to turn the topic to the next war. Due to the obstruction of the Griffin Knights, the reconnaissance function of the airships has been greatly reduced in the past few days. Those pilots only dared to observe with telescopes from a distance of at least 3 kilometers. Even so, they were almost shot down. That insidious Sedwell was really good at playing tricks. He actually hid some Griffin Knights in the woods, let the army move slowly, and waited for the airships to approach for reconnaissance, and then suddenly rushed out of the woods. If the pilots hadn't reacted in the first time, and the 2 airships were running fast, they would have been almost wiped out. Because of this, few pilots are willing to approach for reconnaissance, so now they can only barely know the movements of this legion and can't get more intelligence. Although laser magic has been developed, it will take a long time to put it into service on a large scale. Lin En suggested that this magic could be taught to some trustworthy former wizards, who could be used as humanoid laser launchers. It is crucial to seize air superiority, which can greatly reduce casualties. It would be better for us to do it ourselves and get rid of these annoying griffins until they dare not take off, Adela said viciously. No, this will be too ineffective. Lin En shook his head. Although these great wizards can fly, they are far less flexible in the air than the Griffin Knights. Even if they attack suddenly, they can only kill dozens of griffins at most, and they can't stop other Griffin Knights at all. You have to know that the number of cardinals in the church is likely to be more than them. These people have no intention of taking action so far, and they may block them at any time. If they waste their magic power and leak the information of key magic, it will be difficult to be countered in the subsequent battles. Either don't do it, or once you do it, you have to destroy the entire Griffin Knights. Otherwise, if these people successfully retreated and thought about it for a while, they might be able to come up with a way to crack the laser magic, and then they would have to face endless harassment. Magic and divine arts have the same origin, so this is not impossible. Chapter 339. This person is the destroyer of Harbor Town and the mastermind behind the destruction of the church. On a hot summer day, in the wilderness several kilometers away from the capital of the kingdom of Hadrada, a large black shadow was spreading from the other side of the horizon towards the capital. Brown flags were flying in the air, accompanied by the sound of drums and horseshoes, which was very orderly. They are coming so fast. Raphael and others stood on the city wall, staring at the army approaching from a distance, a dark mass with no end in sight. It is roughly estimated that there are at least 80,000 people. They are roughly divided into 3 groups. The legions on both sides are numerous, but the formation is slightly scattered, and even the soldiers' weapons and armor are incomplete. Hebrew, Austin, Barrow. These traitors of the kingdom. Hatcher gritted his teeth and said, but he recognized from the towering flags and the ancestral emblems on the flags that these were the armies of several border dukes of the kingdom. Lin En cast a far-sighted magic and looked at the silver-armored army guarding the center. All of them were burly and walked forward solemnly. Their cold and ruthless eyes looked forward, which was daunting. This was the famous God's punishment army. In just 10 days, the Legion of the Church had already reached the capital. In fact, according to the intelligence they obtained, there were nobles who tried to resist along the way, but it was futile. The solid city walls could stop the ground army, but they could not stop the Griffin Knights who fell from the sky. Even without the bishop's help, the whole city would fall within an hour. Do we need to go out of the city to fight, Lord Lin En? Redell asked solemnly. Old York and others on the side had an expression of expectation and eagerness. Although the number of the Vatican's troops was far greater than theirs, they were not afraid. At that time, Duke Rickman led an army several times larger than theirs, but they were still beaten to a pulp by the muskets in their hands. So in Old York's view, these were not 80,000 enemy troops, but heads that needed to be fought for. No, it's not the right time yet. Lin En shook his head. According to the current production speed of laser launchers, it will take about 2 or 3 days to equip them on the airship. If they rush out of the city to fight without air superiority, there may be considerable casualties. After all, their opponents this time are not as simple as feudal soldiers holding swords, but also have powerful divine powers. What do you think, Your Majesty? Hatcher. Lin En turned his head and looked at the king beside him. Hatcher was extremely anxious. Now that a large area of the kingdom's eastern territory had been completely occupied, he wanted to immediately command these wizards to rush out to defeat these damn Vatican legions, recapture the lost territory, and execute the rebellious nobles. But Hatcher finally held back. He knew that Lin En's words meant that he was not completely sure, so he had to grit his teeth and said, "Then let's do it this way. Defend instead of attack." At the same time, the army of the Holy See stopped in the wilderness outside the capital. A middle-aged man wearing silver armor and a holy emblem painted on his chest focused his eyes on the city wall. His outstanding eyesight could still clearly see his target from the crowd several kilometers away, and he spoke with interest. "Is that the great wizard Lin En who is wanted for 300,000 imperial gold coins? He is much younger than I thought." "Don't be careless, Arno. This is not an easy target to deal with." The boy, wearing an iron mask, said solemnly, and then told the other party about the information about Lin En. This great wizard was wanted for 50,000 imperial gold coins for the crime of burning down the harbor town, and he wrote it himself. Now he has planned this kingdom rebellion, so the reward has naturally increased layer by layer, and now it has accumulated to a huge amount of 300,000. This is an extremely exaggerated amount. Even a poor man can buy a powerful duke position with this money. In the sinner chapter of the Bible, the description of the other party also includes the destruction of the kingdom church, the killing of the cardinal, and blasphemy. It can only be described as unforgivable. All the wanted criminals who have appeared in the pages of the Bible in the past have not been compared with him. He controls a strange hellfire that can devour human flesh and blood, and it is difficult to extinguish it with normal methods. Ed will reminded. But as long as the elements in the air are isolated, it can be blocked from burning. In addition, non-combustible sand and stone can also bury it. Temperature is also a key factor. Edwell said in great detail. He had sent people to find the wreckage of the airship before and analyzed the characteristics of this flame. The bishops tried various methods and finally buried it with sand. "In that case, I will accept the 300,000 bounty." Arno smiled and recorded Edwell's words firmly in his heart. "If you have this ability, his ice magic is also not weak." Edwell's face with an iron mask could not see any expression. After reminding again, he turned his head and looked at several dukes of the kingdom. Hebrew, Austin, Barrow. "You will lead the kingdom's army as the vanguard." "But, Lord Edwell, those wizards will cast all kinds of strange witchcraft." I'm afraid we can't even get close to the city wall alone, Duke Barrow said with a slight tremor. The nobles of the kingdom who were watching also looked like they wanted to say something but hesitated. Although they chose to surrender without hesitation when the army of the church came, it did not mean that they were very pious. According to the intelligence obtained, the army trained by these wizards would use a strange witchcraft weapon with great power. A whole well-trained cavalry was easily defeated during the charge. Even if they could capture the capital, they would probably suffer heavy casualties. This is your only chance. Use facts to prove your loyalty to the Lord and repent of your sins. Edwell's words were full of irrefutable meaning. Edwell had no good feelings for these nobles who changed their minds with the wind. After the wizards killed King Basil and launched a rebellion, only a few nobles loyal to the church chose to resist, and more people were wavering, and even mixed with those wizards to persecute local priests and bishops. These were undoubtedly criminals. So Edwire brought in all the nobles in the eastern part of the kingdom, whether they were barons, viscounts or dukes, to gather such a large army. Chapter 340, The Enemy at the Gate and the Hard-to-Break Firearms. Under the pressure of Edwell, Hebrew and Barrow looked at each other, and they regretted it very much. If their troops were all dead, they would not be able to deal with the attack of other nobles with just the title of duke. If they had known this earlier, they might as well obey Hatcher's order and enter the capital. But it was too late to regret now. No matter how unwilling Hebrew and Barrow were, there was nothing they could do. At this moment, Edwell's indifferent voice rang in everyone's ears. Whoever among all of you can capture the capital, or has made the most outstanding achievements, will be the next king of Hadratha. Edwell's words were like throwing a huge stone into a calm lake, and the nobles present were red-eyed. Hebrew and Barrow were no exception. This was an opportunity to rule an entire kingdom. It might also be the only chance. As nobles of the kingdom, they could attack and plunder each other's territory, and they could also use all kinds of dark means. But there was one line that could not be touched, and that was to replace the king, unless you get the approval of the church, and wear the crown under the witness and grace of God. More than 100 years ago, the former king of the Basil family won the throne in this way. That is to say, after becoming king, as long as you don't rebel against the church, you can pass on the throne forever under the protection of God. Now King Basil is dead, and the eldest prince also died tragically in the capital. Coupled with Edwell's guarantee, the replacement of the new king has become possible. Thinking of this, the nobles of the kingdom were all excited. With the support of the church, even if he was just a small baron, he would have the opportunity to rise to the sky and become king. Hebrew immediately took action, rode his horse to the front of the soldiers, and spoke passionately. People of God, those followers of the evil God are in this capital in front of you. They want to open the gates of hell, destroy the entire kingdom, and let the devil, disaster and plague run rampant in the world. We must not tolerate such a thing. These evildoers and cultists must pay the price of blood for their evil deeds. As long as you kill an enemy in front of you, you can get an imperial gold coin. Killing a wizard will be awarded the title of knight. The first person to climb the city wall will be rewarded with 1,000 gold coins and the title of earl. Hebrew's words resounded in the wilderness like a huge bell. Under the encouragement of the heavy reward, the enthusiasm of tens of thousands of troops was mobilized in an instant. God is with me, Hebrew shouted loudly. God is with me. The morale of tens of thousands of troops was high, and they shouted in unison. The loud shouts echoed in the sky like thunder. Then dozens of nobles led their private soldiers to the capital. The drums were getting louder and louder, and at the same time, there were the devout songs of praise from priests and bishops. Great Lord of the stars, Goddess of the moon, the creator of all things in the world, please bestow your grace and grant us light, hope and strength. In the ethereal songs, the brilliance of divine arts emerged from tens of thousands of noble soldiers, and their hearts were filled with infinite courage and strength at this moment. Here they come, the might of tens of thousands of people charging in groups made old York and others who had been prepared for it nervous, but they still set up their muskets at the first time and waited quietly for the enemy to reach the shooting distance. The best output environment for muskets is of course that both sides are on the same plane and shoot in rows, but looking down from a high place can also gain a wider field of view, not to mention that they have too many enemies this time. so there is no need to worry about whether they can hit them or not. The 10,000 musketeers guarding the city wall were divided into several arrays, and fired according to the command, forming an uninterrupted firepower network. With the first round of gunfire, the soldiers who were charging in groups fell down in rows. It was roughly estimated that there were thousands of them. The scene looked extremely spectacular, but just 1 second later, because nearly 70% of them climbed up again, with red eyes and shouting for the gods, they continued to rush to the city wall. The wizards watching the battle on the city wall had extremely solemn faces. Lin En could also see that these people were blessed with divine protection. Last time when facing the kingdom army, he also saw something similar, but the opponent at that time was only a few bishops and dozens of priests. The strength of the divine arts released was limited, and it could only brainwash people and increase their courage. But this time it was different. It actually blessed tens of thousands of people with a real divine shield. The strength should be about the same as a ring of protective magic. It cannot resist the attack of muskets, but it can greatly weaken it. If the armor is hit in a harder place, it may not be able to break through the defense, and it will only be knocked down by the impact. If the guards are not using muskets but crossbows at this moment, it is afraid that it will be difficult to even break through the defense. Fortunately, these shields are disposable. Raphael saw that most of the soldiers who got up again fell to the ground after the second round of shooting and did not get up again, and he was relieved. But this is equivalent to one more life. Thinking of this, Raphael turned his head and looked at Lin En, and really admired the foresight of this magic star. When discussing how to fight this war a few days ago, they all proposed to take the initiative to attack, relying on the advantage of equipment, directly defeating this church legion in the wilderness, and even killing all the way to the empire. After all, the previous 2 victories were too easy. The musket team destroyed several times the number of opponents with very low casualties. It can be said that their enemies can't even resist effectively, so isn't it a flat push? Only Lin En insisted on defending the city and tried to avoid fighting in the plains before finding out the details of the enemy. This is good for the musketeers, but it is also very suitable for large-scale corps operations and cavalry charges. Now it seems that with this large-scale protective magic, the muskets cannot exert their power 100%. They are fighting in the wilderness, and the formation is likely to be directly defeated. At this time, all the musketeers also found that their enemies this time were extraordinary. They could take a musket without dying, and they could still carry the latter to the city alive and well. They immediately put away their previous arrogant mentality. Old York was assigned to the third wave of shooting. In the first 2 rounds of shooting, he carefully observed the enemy's movements with a telescope that he had exchanged for his military exploits. It was soon discovered that the soldiers who died in the first round of shooting were all hit in the weak parts of the armor, or were very unlucky and took it directly with their faces. So it's not that the muskets in their hands can't break the defense, but that they have been doubly weakened by the magic protection and armor, so the projectiles cannot cause fatal damage. Chapter 341, The Fierce Battle to Defend the Capital. Third theme, Shoot. A loud shout resounded on the city wall. Old York hurriedly pulled the bolt and placed the telescope with the adjusted magnification on the butt of the gun, picking out the nobles wearing gorgeous clothes. When shooting in the previous 2 groups, he had already found the target, the one who was dressed the most showy. Charge! Charge! Under the city wall of the capital, Grand Duke Barrow shouted loudly. Although the intensive gunfire and the roar of artillery continued to sound on the battlefield, he did not have a trace of fear in his heart. He believed that God was protecting him, and he also believed that the armor he bought at a high price had the best protection. Indistinctly, Barrow seemed to have seen the moment when he rushed into the city, killed the false King Hatcher, and put on the crown. An indescribable excitement filled his brain, but the next moment, his mind froze. A round lead bullet broke through the air and penetrated the divine barrier in an instant, and shot straight into Barrow's eyes along the gap in the armor. The power of the magic was fading, and consciousness was rapidly stripping away. At the moment when Barrow lost consciousness, he suddenly realized that the so-called throne of the king was just an illusory temptation. They were just cannon fodder to consume the enemy. Perfect. Old York, who had collected a head on the wall, cheered for his outstanding shooting skills. The unlucky guy just now, with such gorgeous armor, should be a nobleman after all, right? That's several more gold coins in hand. After changing the bullets happily, Old York continued to pick up the telescope to find the next target. There were not a few musketeers who had the same little idea as him. A group of nobles who were dominated by magic and desire on the battlefield soon died tragically on the spot in the sound of gunfire. Although not everyone was a sharpshooter, and the nobles were wearing the most sophisticated armor, they could not stand being pointed at by more than a dozen muskets, and they were shot into sieves after a round of shooting. The increasing number of casualties also made the hot-blooded Hebrews and others gradually break free from the influence of the magic. After all, they were not poor people who were easy to fool. Even if they had the temptation to rule a kingdom, they could not resist the fear of death. The pace of the charge became slower and slower, or they simply retreated to the back and commanded the army to fight. The casualties of the soldiers were even more severe. In less than an hour, more than 4,000 people had died under the city wall, and the red blood dyed the large area of land outside the city red. The sound of fighting and shooting continued to resound on the battlefield, sometimes accompanied by a burst of intermittent arrows, but it would soon be interrupted by artillery bombardment, and the remaining sparse arrows did not pose much threat. These sacrifices were not without value. They had crossed the line of death and rushed to the city wall. The ladders for climbing the city had been set up. The battering ram, which was also blessed with protection, also reached the city gate under the cover of the human wall, but it was hit by several shells and was hit crooked. The iron hammer hit the city gate again and again, making an unbearable muffled sound. However, apart from a slight shake, the city gate still stood firm, because behind it was a half-meter thick cement wall, which was made by Lin En and others using magic. It was very solid. Not to mention the siege hammer, even divine magic would be a bit difficult to break it. When more and more soldiers gathered under the city gate, the wizards standing on the city wall finally took action. Fire, frost, lightning, falling rocks. Continuous magic fell down, turning the entire battlefield into hell. Just this round of magic bombing, there were thousands of casualties, and the siege ladders and siege hammers that were painstakingly built were all reduced to ashes. After clearing the soldiers near the city wall, Alok and others stopped casting spells and handed over the attack to the musket team. The magic power of wizards is not infinite. Usually, after releasing 5 or 6 magics of the same level, they will be in a dilemma of lack of mental power. You must know that those divine magicians have not yet entered the battlefield directly, and they cannot invest too much power. The huge casualties did not scare the rest of the soldiers. They continued to move forward, as if they did not see the tragic wailing of their companions beside them, shouting for the gods to continue to build siege ladders. The deeper the belief in this kind of auxiliary divine magic, the greater the impact. And these poor people at the bottom have nothing. They can only rely on prayer to resist the hardships of life on weekdays. At this moment, in their eyes, Lin En and others on the wall seem to be the culprits of all evil and the people who cause them suffering. Even crazy enough to make Old York hesitate when shooting, this group of people are simply evil ghosts from hell. Even with a broken leg, they crawled all the way to the bottom of the wall and scratched the solid wall with their nails. It's so tragic. Raphael sighed reluctantly. It was the first time for him to experience such a large-scale war, but he had no intention of taking action. He just watched quietly. This small scene was far from the time when they needed to take action. Lin En frowned slightly. Very strange. Not quite understanding what the Weir was doing. Just letting these people come to die? According to the art of war, without several times the number of troops and more advanced weapons and tactics, there is no difference between a strong attack on the city and sending heads. Even if all these tens of thousands of people died, they could not shake the city at all. Weir could never be a reckless man who only knew how to attack, otherwise he would not be qualified to lead troops to conquer the kingdom and command the 2 elite troops of the God's Punishment Army and the Griffin Knights. Could it be that they want to use the lives of these poor people to consume our ammunition? Sanchez speculated. Hearing this, Raphael and others also became a little worried. The 10,000 musketeers guarding the city wall, after a few rounds of shooting, consumed tens of thousands of bullets, and the consumption per hour started at 100,000. They didn't know much about the production process of lead bullets, but they noticed that they were round and of the same size. Even if the process was not complicated, it would take a lot of time. Haha, that's just wishful thinking. You probably don't know how these bullets are made. Dennis sneered. Even if it's simple, how many can a person make in a day? A great wizard said with a smile. The bullets can't have fallen from the sky, right? He could probably guess the production method, which was nothing more than melting the lead ore at high temperature and then making them into spheres of the same size. No, they really did fall from the sky, Dennis said with a strange look on his face. Chapter 342, Waste of Resources. Is this how you are supposed to use oil? Dennis's straightforward words shocked the wizards present, and they almost thought that the other party was joking. How could the bullets of the musket fall from the sky? Even if it was a joke, it was too outrageous. However, they soon heard Lin En nodding and saying, "The production of lead bullets does not require much manpower. It is not a problem to say that they fell from the sky. They made lead bullets using the high tower method that was popular in the 18th century. All they needed was a building several dozen meters high, a magic furnace on the top, and a large pool below to receive the lead bullets. When they needed to make lead bullets, they would burn a furnace of lead water on the top of the tower, and then pour the molten lead liquid directly from a high place. The molten lead liquid would be in a state of weightlessness in midair, and spontaneously form a sphere under the action of surface tension, and quickly cool and solidify into a spherical lead bullet during their fall. In other words, the production of lead bullets uses the gravity of the planet as a hammer, and the tension of the liquid itself shapes it. No manpower is required throughout the process. As long as there is enough lead ore, it can be mass-produced at a very fast speed. The kingdom of Hadrada lacks everything except various types of ores. In order to cope with this war, he directly built more than 10 high-tower factories in the capital, storing more than 10 tons of lead ore. Apart from anything else, there are enough bullets for muskets. This is also the advantage of being backed by the city, and there is no need to worry about the supply problem. After Lin En's narration, Sanchez and others were still confused. Although this method is very simple, the relevant principles are not so easy to figure out. It is true that objects fall naturally under the action of gravity, but considering the air resistance, they should be elliptical or olive-shaped. Why do they fall into the water in the form of a sphere? They have never observed this carefully before. Raphael even extracted water vapor from the air on the spot and conducted a liquid free-fall experiment directly on the city wall. Outside the capital of Hadrada, Edwell, who had been paying attention to the enemy's movements, immediately noticed the strange movements of the great wizards and became alert. Are they creating a current? No. Water drops? Arno also had a confused expression. With his divine vision, he could see the general movements of everyone on the wall from 2 kilometers away. Maybe it's the opening move of some kind of magic, a cardinal speculated. It could also be a curse like witchcraft. The bishops were also alert. In the past, when they led people to capture wizards, their biggest headache was being plotted against by all kinds of strange spells. The lawyer thought for a moment, but couldn't figure out what these people were doing. Out of caution, he raised his hand and cast a 6-ring divine spell, Heavenly Protection. An invisible barrier rose quietly, engulfing everyone present. The whole world seemed to be becoming illusory, as if there was a thin film between them and the world. Looking from the inside out, it was as if they were looking at the fish and shrimp swimming in the lake through the lake. However, the imagined attack did not come. The group of great wizards only created drops of water and then stared at them falling to the ground, as if they were playing a ridiculous and childish game. This is of course impossible. Now that they are in the middle of a war, the other party will never do something meaningless. There must be some deep meaning. These witchcraft weapons are really good. Compared to still thinking about Edwell, Arno focused his attention on the battlefield. The whole situation can only be described as one-sided. The noble private soldiers who attacked the capital added up to 50,000 people. Now that nearly 10,000 people have been sacrificed, they still have not achieved any results. They are like wheat stalks in the wheat field falling in rows under the waving of sickles. Arno had to put away his previous contempt for these wizards. They also collected intelligence about firearms, but now it seems that they are much more powerful than expected. Even if these noble soldiers have the dual protection of armor and divine magic, they cannot completely block it. Those artillery are even more powerful. If they are hit head-on, no matter how thick the armor they wear, they will be directly crushed into meat paste. No wonder they could easily capture the capital and get rid of the kingdom's church. After conquering the capital, remember to leave a few people alive. If you can find out how to make it, it will be much easier to deal with those demons in the future. Arno suddenly said with a smile. These are all creations of witchcraft, the knowledge of the devil, and they should be destroyed. A cardinal next to him retorted with great dissatisfaction. Rashly watching and learning forbidden knowledge may lead to unpredictable consequences. In the past, there were also high-level officials in the church who believed that some of the inventions of wizards were very interesting and could be used. As a result, some priests and even bishops with poor willpower, after checking the confiscated witchcraft notes, were actually bewitched by the devil's knowledge and betrayed God's grace. Since then, in the operation of catching wizards, the confiscated pages, notes, and spellcasting materials must be burned immediately, or taken to the forbidden library and sealed. The evil gods and the devil are likely to cast magic in those forbidden witchcraft knowledge, and anyone who reads them will inevitably fall into the abyss. Aren't we going to do it yet, Lord Adloyer? Arno was too lazy to argue with these people, and turned his head to look at Adloyer and asked, if this continues, these 50,000 people may all die here, and their deaths are worthless. Adloyer did not reply, but asked back, how is the kerosene prepared? This thing has been delivered a long time ago. A strong smile appeared on Arno's face. With a wave of his hand, more than 100 guards in silver armor brought barrels of metal barrels filled with thick black liquid. These kerosene were discovered by a fisherman a few months ago. After an earthquake, a crack suddenly appeared in the ground, and rolling black oil came out from it. As a result, no one knew who ignited it, and the fire burned for half a month. The local fishermen thought that the gate of hell had been opened, so they notified the church. In the end, it was a cardinal who took action to quell the fire. After testing, it was found that this thing had nothing to do with the so-called devil, and there was no trace of magic. It was used as a weapon in the war against cultists and demons, and achieved good results. But the range of the catapult should not be enough to throw the kerosene over. A bishop frowned and said, the cannons made by the wizards have a much longer range than the catapult, and they are easily hit. Since it doesn't work on the ground, let's do it from the sky. Arno grinned. He already understood what Edwill meant. Chapter 343 Oil, the blood of industry, the source of power. From the sky? After a brief moment of dazement, the bishops present also came to their senses. The wizards' airships did not take off, obviously because they were afraid of the power of the Griffin Knights, which means that they could completely imitate them and use the speed and height advantages of the Griffin Knights to attack from the air. Divi, you will lead the team this time. Edwill continued to ask. I understand, Lord Edwill. I will never come back until the mission is completed. Divi put his right hand on his chest and swore firmly, then led a group of Griffin Knights, brought kerosene wrapped in special cloth, and rose into the sky. I will also go to meet these devil's believers and try their abilities. Arno couldn't help but ask Edwill for a fight, and also took a portion of kerosene and replaced one of the Griffin Knights to perform the mission. Hundreds of Griffin Knights rose into the sky, and their golden hair flashed brightly under the sunlight, like pieces of golden clouds. Pay attention, those griffins are in the air. Lin En raised his voice a little more on the tower and warned. In fact, there was no need to remind them. Such a big movement could not be concealed at all. Raphael and others who were wondering why the liquid always appeared in a circle in the air were forced to interrupt their thinking and prepare together. These elite troops began to move, which meant that the church was going to take real action. In just 1 minute, those Griffin Knights had already rushed to the sky above the capital, maintaining an altitude of about 1,000 meters, circling constantly, and occasionally diving down for a distance, passing about 300 or 400 meters above their heads. It was full of provocation and successfully interfered with the performance of the musketeers, because no one knew when these griffin knights hanging in the sky would launch an attack. Pyroblast. Several wizards who couldn't stand the provocation cast a spell together after the griffin knights dived again. Several fireballs flew into the sky and flew towards several griffin knights in the sky. Using the formula of the mathematical Olympiad, they calculated the enemy's flying position in advance, which was a sure win. However, their plan failed. The griffin just flapped its wings and suddenly turned in the air, easily avoiding the fire and explosion. Then, instead of taking off to avoid it, it lowered its altitude again and flew over their heads, making the wizards very angry. They all cast spells to fight back. Magic barrage, ice storm, multiple pyroblast. Dozens of magic flew into the sky at once, but they wanted to rely on the advantage of numbers to forcibly shoot down these flexible griffins. Unfortunately, Divi, who had expected it, commanded everyone to fly into the sky again the moment he felt the strong fluctuation of magic power, and all the magic failed again. Raphael hurriedly stopped them. "Stop, don't waste your magic power and fall into the enemy's trap." "Damn it, if we could use that magic, how could these griffin knights dare to be so arrogant?" Nancy muttered to herself angrily. She and Glenn both learned the laser magic improved by Lin and Anthony, but Lin didn't let them use it easily, saying that the time was not right yet. "Be patient, they don't have the courage to come over. If they get too close, we will just shoot them down. Just pretend they don't exist." Raphael shook his head and said, "The wizards on the tower were very unhappy, but there was nothing they could do. Their magic could not cross such a long distance and cause enough lethality to the griffins moving at high speed. The opponent was too flexible and couldn't be hit at all." Divi led the griffin knights and frequently provoked the wizards on the wall in the air. After roughly assessing the safe range, most of the griffins dispersed. Arno did not leave, but fought with a small number of griffin knights who stayed behind, aiming at the cannons placed on the city wall, commanding the griffins under him to dive at an altitude of about 500 meters, and then suddenly threw the kerosene cloth in his hand to his target. "Wait, what is that?" Glenn, who had been staring at the sky with sharp eyes, noticed something wrong at the first time. "Fire, it's fire!" a wizard shouted loudly. "Is it some kind of divine magic?" Looking at the fireballs falling from the sky, Dennis frowned and said, "I don't know, but it must be related to those griffin knights." Sanchez shook his head. His expression was particularly solemn, because the same scene appeared in every corner of the sky above the capital, as if it was raining fire in the sky. Magic barrier. On the city wall, hundreds of former wizards cast spells together, and a circular magic barrier immediately enveloped their heads. The cloth wrapped in oil quickly disintegrated under the erosion of the flames, hitting the barrier, making a series of bursting roars. Part of the black liquid that had not been burned yet stuck to the magic barrier above their heads. At the same time, a pungent smell reached everyone's noses. Toxic gas? The wizards who had studied poison gas magic noticed this substance after it invaded the barrier and immediately held their breath vigilantly. Lin En quickly recognized these black, unburned liquids, with an expression of both astonishment and some surprise. "Wait. Can't this be oil? Oil? What is that?" Dennis and others were confused. Another word they had never heard of. "A very critical liquid fuel," Lin En answered. "What is oil?" "It is the blood of industry, the source of power, and one of the most important cornerstones of modernization. In addition to being a fuel, it can also be made into plastics, asphalt, synthetic rubber, etc. Although the magic-powered internal combustion engines running in the wizard land now provide power by converting hydrogen through magic power and triggering gas explosions, the efficiency is much higher than that of liquid fuels, but the cost is a big problem. For example, a crystal magic stone of standard diameter is worth 3 magic gold coins, which can only provide 5 days of flight fuel for an airship. If it were not for the war, the parliament would support it regardless of the cost, and even use the magic stone reserves accumulated in the past to continue to supply hundreds of airships. Once the process of magicization is extended to the entire kingdom of Hadjarata, Magic stones will definitely not be the mainstream. Oil is a good substitute. He had asked the kingdom's spies to pay attention to it before, but oil exploration is not an easy task, and no news has been sent back so far. Lin En did not expect to find traces of oil in this war, and it was directly used as kerosene. This is simply a waste of resources. Chapter 344 The thunder net covering the sky above the royal capital. Just as Lin En was explaining what oil was, similar magic barriers rose above the towering towers, the enclosed factories, and the capital, blocking the falling fire rain. In order to avoid being attacked by some rebels during the fierce battle, burning the granary and their firearms depot, or even causing a large-scale explosion, Lin En naturally asked the alchemists to set up magic protection in key places and arranged a lot of people to guard these places. This is also the reason why there are only 10,000 musketeers and a few hundred official wizards on the city wall, because everyone else went to assist in the defense. After seeing that the kerosene attack had little effect, some of the Griffin Knights lowered their altitude and used their sharp claws to scratch and destroy the magic barrier. The Griffin's sharp claws were still very effective in breaking magic, and soon scratched the magic barrier. The other part turned their targets to the surrounding houses. The hot kerosene hit the roofs and streets, and the fire soon burned in the city. Damn it! Seeing the flames spread throughout the capital, Hatcher was anxious and hurriedly urged Lin En and others to send people to rescue. He didn't care much about the lives of those poor people, but his palace was also given special treatment. At least 30 Griffin Knights were hovering over the palace, and the protective barrier set up before could not hold for long. Although the musketeers were also shooting into the air, it was really ineffective. So far, no Griffin Knight has been shot down. Raphael was in a dilemma for a while. Those Griffin Knights were scattered throughout the capital. Once too many people were sent to rescue, the elite legion of the church, which was waiting outside the city, would launch a general attack without hesitation. The other side was probably waiting for this opportunity. The drumbeats that had originally subsided on the battlefield drank again. The God's Punishment Army, which had been standing still, began to slowly approach, exerting pressure on the people on the city wall. There were still dozens of Griffin Knights circling above their heads in the sky, diving down from time to time to attack the barriers above their heads, or throwing kerosene far away and turning around and running. Some wizards of the plastic school were angry and wanted to transform into flying monsters to fight with these Griffin Knights in the air, but they were quickly stopped by Raphael and others. The number of the other side was too large. If they rashly engaged in an air battle, they would only be besieged and killed. "Do you want to use that now?" Anthony asked cautiously. "Not yet." Lin En shook his head. He knew that Anthony was talking about the new laser magic they had invented, but so far only 11 people had learned it. By taking them by surprise, they might be able to kill some of the Griffin Knights, but then the other party would definitely be on guard next time. But this chaotic scene should also end. Lin En looked up at the sky, and a large amount of data flashed through his mind. The position and movement of each Griffin Knight were constructed into a three-dimensional model. Under the analysis of the intelligent brain, their movement trajectory and possible escape direction were all visible. Magic barrage. As his mind flashed, hundreds of magic missiles with a diameter of 30 centimeters appeared in the void. Lin En's sudden action gave the worried wizards a glimmer of hope. In the past, this famous magic star had never let them down. The Griffin Knights flying in the sky also noticed the fluctuations of magic below and increased their altitude. "Come on, let me see what you can do." Arno showed a ferocious smile on his face. He had always been paying close attention to the blasphemer mentioned by Edwell, so when he saw Lin En take action, he couldn't help but get excited. In a flash, those magic missiles came whistling, shooting at the griffins in the sky at a speed of 200 meters per second, drawing strange arcs in the air. As a high-level monster, the griffins have strong magic resistance and danger perception. With the cooperation of the knights, they are like flexible fish swimming in the gaps between magic missiles. Arno is not a professional Griffin Knight. After dodging several magic missiles, he cast a divine shield to block all the remaining attacks. That's all. Arno's tense mind suddenly relaxed. The number and speed of this magic are indeed very difficult to deal with. There are many Griffin Knights like him who are hit by missiles, but the power is too weak and can't break their divine protection at all. Arno laughed and wanted to fly down to provoke the wizards again, but the moment he touched the reins, his whole hand was electrocuted. The golden hair of the griffin under him stood up faintly, and it made a series of uneasy chirping sounds. It seems to have failed. Seeing that Lin En couldn't even shoot down a griffin knight, Sanchez sighed and shook his head. Isn't it funny to use this apprentice-level magic missile? Anthony, who is proficient in thunder magic, sensed something different. You come too, Anthony, there are a lot of them, and the power of magic will be dispersed. Lin En raised his hand while speaking, and a flash of lightning flashed at his fingertips. Anthony also cooperated in casting spells without hesitation, and a flash of lightning flashed around him. Thunder prison, lightning storm, heavenly punishment, thunder judgment. Two powerful thunder magics flew into the sky almost at the same time. Although lightning is very fast, it needs to rely on a medium to propagate. The conductivity of the air is very poor, which is why Anthony did not rashly use lightning magic for air defense. But now it was different. Lin En used hundreds of magic missiles to forcibly create a large-scale electromagnetic field. The griffins in the sky sensed the danger and flapped their wings in fear, trying to fly out of this range, but their speed and flexibility, which they were proud of, were not worth mentioning in front of the spread of lightning, accompanied by two violent thunderous sounds. In just a short second, a huge lightning net covering the surrounding airspace was formed. The blue-purple lightning occupied the entire field of vision, and the divine barrier on the body was instantly broken. The violent electric current rushed directly into the body. The knights inside the electromagnetic field were directly electrocuted into charcoal. Even those griffins with extremely strong magic resistance could not escape the fate of being directly roasted. The griffin knights who were not completely affected by the lightning were also hit by the scattered arcs. Their bodies fell stiffly from the sky. Amid screams and wails, griffins rained down from the sky. Many people were unlucky enough to fall into the house where they had just dropped kerosene. They were paralyzed by lightning and cooked by the raging fire and turned into a pile of rotten meat. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345, The Terrified Griffin Knights. Retreat, retreat quickly, get out of the way. The roar of thunder rang out over the entire capital, and the spreading lightning net was clearly visible inside and outside the capital. In an instant, hundreds of griffin knights were swept in, and the arcs of electricity as thick as arms continued to spread around. The griffin knights hovering around the capital were frightened and flew thousands of meters high in the sky, not daring to stay in the low sky for a moment. Looking at the thunder field covering their heads, the substantive sense of oppression made the wizards present stand on end. They didn't expect that Master Lin En actually had such a trick up his sleeve. Sanchez, who had been quick talking before, was so embarrassed that he couldn't speak at this moment. He had just said that the opponent's magic didn't have much effect a second ago, but the next second, Lin En's lightning net knocked down all the griffin knights. As expected of the magic star, Sanchez couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Lin En's understanding of magic and his creativity in magic were not comparable to his own. His ability to respond on the spot was simply amazing. No wonder Lin En didn't seem to be in a hurry at all when facing the harassment of these griffin knights. Go and catch them. There must be some survivors. Put out the fire. They shouldn't dare to come down again in a short time. Lin En put down his hand and ordered casually. Glenn and others nodded after receiving the order. 50 formal wizards were assigned on the spot to lead more than 1,000 musketeers to put out the fire and capture prisoners. The threat from the air disappeared temporarily, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Dean, since this thunder magic is so powerful, why didn't you take advantage of the time when those griffin knights gathered together to shoot them all down? Alok asked with regret. The power of thunder and lightning will be dispersed. These griffin knights are not easy to deal with. They have high magic resistance. Even the third ring magic needs to hit them head-on to cause a fatal threat. Lin En explained simply. He did not explain another factor, The spell just now looked simple, but in fact, to build a large enough electromagnetic field to include all the enemies in the air, corresponding data was needed to support it. Just now, those Griffin Knights frequently provoked them in the sky, testing their spellcasting range, and at the same time, they also exposed their flight and evasion data, all of which were recorded in the database of the intelligent brain. What Lin En was waiting for was the moment when these Griffin Knights thought they were in a safe area and gradually relaxed their vigilance. So he hit them hard in one fell swoop. However, although the results of this battle were very rich, Lin En did not underestimate this group of elite forces of the church, but instead raised their threat rating to a higher level. According to the data given by the intelligent brain, these griffins can fly at a speed of nearly 80 km per hour when carrying people and a lot of oil, and even faster when accelerating to dive, reaching more than 130 kilometers. The standard speed of the third-generation airship is 150 kilometers per hour, and the difference between the two is not that big. Almost every knight on their backs can use simple magic, and with the help of the extremely fast and flexible griffins, they even have the ability to kill a former wizard in a one-on-one battle. Each Griffin Knight is extremely powerful, not to mention the attack from the air. If they were not afraid of the magic of these wizards, these 800 Griffin Knights would be enough to burn the entire capital and kill all the defenders here. Only the church has such a big hand to train powerful monsters such as griffins for war on a large scale. He has seen the Griffin Knights, one of the two elites, and they are indeed impressive. I just don't know what the God's punishment army will look like. Thinking of this, Lin En looked at the silver-armored guards marching in formation in the distance, and said with a sigh, "Electromagnetic guns are ready. It's rude not to return the favor. Let these people also see the power of magic." At the other end of the battlefield, Edwell, who was about to launch a general attack by taking advantage of the chaos caused by the Griffin Knights, did not expect that the situation on the battlefield would reverse 180 degrees in an instant. The Griffin Knights, who were originally showing off their might and had completely gained the upper hand, were actually struck down by the lightning in the blink of an eye. Everything happened so fast that they had no time to stop it before it was over. Another magic that has never been recorded. There was no expression on the face of Edwell wearing an iron mask, but his tone was extremely cold. It seemed that those wizards huddled in the wizard land and had researched a lot of new things. "Retreat, today's offensive ends here." Edwell gave the order without hesitation. But, Lord Edwell, Commander Arno was also struck down by lightning and is still in the royal capital. The adjutant of the God's punishment army spoke anxiously, his face full of unwillingness. Although before launching the attack, he had never thought that he could capture this strong city dominated by devil believers within a day, and this battle was only based on testing, but the loss can only be described as tragic. More than 20,000 people have died in the 50,000 noble coalition forces. And the most important thing is that hundreds of Griffin Knights have fallen because of this. His heart is bleeding. The result of the battle that was exchanged for such heavy losses was just to set a fire in the capital and burn down some houses. In his opinion, after several rounds of consumption, those wizards also spent a lot of magic power, and now is the time for a full-scale attack. "Now, convey my order, retreat," Edwell emphasized a little. As for Arno, with that thunder magic, he can't be killed. Edwell said with certainty. The spell released by Lin En was indeed very powerful, but the power was dispersed throughout the airspace and the bodies of hundreds of Griffin Knights. It was impossible to kill Arno, who was a cardinal, and even it was difficult to seriously injure him. Since Arno did not make a big noise in the city, it proved that the other party had his own plan. Edwell's order made the cardinals very dissatisfied. It was the first time that they suffered such a big loss when facing the evil God believers, and now they had to retreat in disgrace. So much so that some people suspected that Edwell wanted to take this opportunity to eliminate dissidents. After all, Arno was known for his unruly behavior, and it was not the first time that he had acted without orders. But before he could refute, a strong wave of magic power came from the city wall of the capital. What were they trying to do at such a long distance? The bishops were puzzled. The distance from here to the city gate was about 1.5 kilometers. According to the test just now, This should exceed the range of the artillery. Chapter 346. This is the realm of God. Before the bishops could figure it out, a strong lightning flashed on the walls of the capital. Even under the scorching sun at noon, it was extremely dazzling. After about 3 seconds of accumulation, the 7 electromagnetic cannons installed on the city gates emitted bursts of violent roars, and an extremely powerful breath burst out from the barrels. Like thunder flashing, 7 special projectiles, driven by the ampere force, turned into gorgeous streams of light and flew towards them. Although there was no lightning magic blessing from hundreds of former wizards this time, the speed was far less than the time when the projection of God was broken, but in the eyes of Edwell and others, it was already incredibly fast. In just over a second, it had already crossed a distance of 1.5 kilometers. Before some bishops could even react, the projectiles wrapped in lightning and as big as a human head had already rushed in front of them. However, the next moment, the electromagnetic cannon with amazing power exploded with a bang, and the flying fragments were like falling into a quagmire. The speed suddenly changed from extremely fast to extremely slow, and before it really reached the crowd, it lost power and fell to the ground. That was the protective magic that Edwell had set up in advance to guard against the wizard's conspiracy. Heavenly protection. This place is the domain of God, and no matter how powerful the magic is, it will be weakened layer by layer when entering it. However, the electromagnetic cannon is not only aimed at them, and the God's punishment army outside the protection range of the magic is not so lucky. What came into view was a scene of beauty and death intertwined. Several gorgeous streamers flashed from the dense array. The terrifying speed and high temperature instantly penetrated the bodies of more than a dozen silver-armored soldiers. Half of the bodies of several people in the front row disappeared directly, and several people in the back row were also beaten into a ball of rotten meat. Waves of shrill screams resounded on the battlefield. Blood splattered, corpses flew, blood foam, broken meat and a strong smell of blood continued to spread around. Form a shield formation, retreat. The adjutant shouted in fear, no longer wanting to attack, and hurriedly issued Edwell's order. The power of the electromagnetic cannon is undoubtedly terrible. You must know that every member of the God's punishment army is selected from witch hunters or knights, but their proud strength and physical fitness are completely useless in front of the projectiles at 3 times the speed of sound. The armor and body are easily penetrated like paper. Fortunately, they are elites who have experienced hundreds of battles and have firm beliefs. Therefore, even in the face of such a terrifying scene, there is no chaos or retreat. The front row of the God's punishment army raised the giant shield in their hands that was solid and emitted divine magic fluorescence, and there was no fear on their faces. The second round of electromagnetic cannons soon bombarded. Although the giant shield with divine magic did not successfully block it, it also reduced the power of the projectile by more than half. After piercing the bodies of 2 or 3 people, it lost power and exploded. Then came the third round. The fourth round. The roar of the electromagnetic cannon resounded throughout the battlefield, and the frequency of firing was even faster than that of artillery. In just 20 seconds, a round of bullets was loaded. These bastards, when we capture the capital, I will hang them one by one on the city wall. Seeing the gorgeous streams of light flying into the dense array, bringing with them streaks of blood, a cardinal's eyes suddenly turned red, his facial muscles twisted, and he gnashed his teeth in anger, but there was nothing he could do. At such a long distance, they could only passively take the beating, and there was no way to hit the enemy on the city wall. Good luck in the sky. Davy, who had avoided the thunder net, immediately wanted to lead the team down to provide cover for the evacuation of the legion, but the frightened griffins didn't think so. After seeing the flashing lightning, they immediately had a stress reaction, screaming and not daring to lower their altitude. The face under the iron mask of Edwell became extremely ugly. In the realm of heaven, the brilliance of divine arts surged, and a golden divine light rushed into the sky. With terrifying power, it crossed the battlefield at a very fast speed with Edwell as the center. Those noble legions that had regained their sanity and were fleeing in panic were soon caught up in it. The golden divine light obscured everyone's vision and attacked the capital directly. Lin En and others did not dare to be careless at all. They used the strongest protective magic to resist this huge attack. However, Nothing happened. The golden divine light quickly dissipated when it came into contact with the magic barrier. It turned out to be just something to fool people. Raphael smiled disdainfully. Just now he thought it was some powerful legendary divine art that could launch an attack across such a long distance. If they had this ability, they would have used it to attack the city long ago. Why would they wait until now? Sanchez said with a smile, and then shook his head. I was fooled. They run really fast. Taking advantage of the time when the magic blocked the vision, the elite army of the church had evacuated 2 kilometers away. After several rounds of bombardment, the 7 electromagnetic rail guns also stopped. First, the distance was too far, and the projectiles would dissolve completely in the air. Second, such high-intensity bombardment would easily cause the electromagnetic rail gun to enter an overload state. It's a pity. If there were more of these things, it would be better, Dennis said with regret. Both the electromagnetic gun itself and the projectile are special. It requires wizards who are proficient in thunder magic and alchemy to manufacture them. It is not suitable for mass production for the time being. Otherwise, if there were 200 electromagnetic guns, the main force of the church would definitely be directly defeated, and the war would be over. Watching the enemies surrounding the city retreat like a tide, Lin En did not order a pursuit. They seemed to have won a great victory, but the formation of the God's punishment army was not even scattered when they evacuated, and they still retained a strong combat power. In addition, the group of Griffin Knights had set fire to the city, causing many casualties. The musketeers, who had fought for nearly 2 hours, also needed a good rest. At the same time, in the capital, Glenn and others were leading people to capture the Griffin Knights that fell from the sky. Falling from a height of hundreds of meters, even a clergyman would be smashed into a pulp, but there are lucky people everywhere. With the help of griffins as a cushion, they still found 5 survivors. The unlucky Arno was also among them. He himself was not in any serious trouble. When he sensed the danger, he immediately used divine magic to block the lightning net that appeared in the sky, but the griffin under him was paralyzed and fell into the capital with him, not far from the city wall. After evaluating the possibility of breaking out of the capital under the siege of a group of great wizards, Arno decisively gave up the idea of breaking out, pretended to be unconscious, and was captured by the wizards and musketeers who came. Chapter 347, a new type of musket that is enough to change the course of the war. Lord Glenn, there is another one here, and he looks alive. Cam, who was in charge of the search, shouted in surprise after finding Arno, who was unconscious on the street. There were many Griffin Knights shot down by the thunder net, but very few survived. Every time a person was caught alive, it was a rare achievement. After all, if some key information could be tortured out of these people, it might change the situation of this war. Glenn, who received the notice, rushed over as soon as possible. After looking at the collapsed eaves and the griffin that was smashed into a ball of meat next to it, he immediately guessed how the other party survived. Then he took a bottle of magic potion and opened Arno's mouth and drank it directly. Drink or not, this is a choice. Arno hesitated for a moment, but in the end he did nothing and let the potion pour into his body. If the other party wanted to kill him, he could just do it directly. There was no need to do anything unnecessary. Arno guessed that these people should want to capture them for interrogation. This is undoubtedly a good opportunity. Arno was thinking about countermeasures in his mind, but his mind immediately became drowsy and he couldn't muster any strength. This special potion can relax a person's muscles, make him fall into a long coma, and completely lose the ability to resist. However, Glenn obviously didn't expect that a cardinal would be among the Griffin Knights and be captured so easily by them, so he only used a normal dose. Arno still maintained a certain degree of consciousness and didn't completely faint. Several musketeers came forward with special ropes and tied him up tightly. Before, they were provoked by the Griffin Knights, but they couldn't fight back. Everyone was full of anger. Now that they had the opportunity to retaliate, they naturally did not do much. One of them even kicked him hard. Arno endured the humiliation and was extremely annoyed. A few lowly poor people dared to treat him like this. He secretly remembered the voices of the crowd in his heart. When they captured this capital, they must let these people taste the torture of the Inquisition. Okay, stop it, don't kill anyone. Glenn saw everyone's actions and hurriedly stopped them. and asked him to send the people to the interrogation room. As the Vatican army retreated, the news of the victory in the first battle quickly spread throughout the capital. Cheers spread from the top of the city to the end of the alley. This was undoubtedly a hearty victory. They only consumed some ammunition to repel the aggressive punitive army, and the corpses piled under the city wall exceeded 20,000. If it weren't for those damn Griffin Knights who relied on flying and burned dozens of houses, causing more than 100 casualties, it would be perfect. Faced with such a great victory, Lin certainly would not be stingy with rewards. All the musketeers who participated in the battle received a magic gold coin as a reward. After recording their military exploits, they would be given additional rewards after the war. Of course, the money was paid by the parliament and the royal family. The griffins that were killed by the fall were not wasted. Some were used for magic research, and the other part was distributed as meat to Old York and others who had made great contributions in the war. For civilians like Old York, tasting the meat of high-level monsters may not be a chance in their lifetime, not to mention that it was roasted using lightning magic. The musketeers who were lucky enough to get the meat felt that they had never eaten such a chewy thing in their lives. After appeasing these heroes of the war, Lin En once again increased the intensity of patrols and guards. Everyone knew that this war was far from over. Today's battle looked tragic, but it was still mainly based on tentative attacks, because the people who could really decide the outcome of the war, the bishops and priests of the Holy See, had not really taken action, and the other side did not invest much elite force. So after Lin En arranged these trivial matters, he rushed to the Alchemy Research Institute established in the royal capital as soon as possible. As soon as he entered the door, a violent explosion came from inside, but both Lin En and the guards here were already used to it. Sure enough, just 2 or 3 minutes later, several wizards from the Alchemy Research Institute came out of a laboratory full of flames, looking dusty. Lydia, who had joined the institute and became a glorious alchemist, asked Lin En when she saw him, "Dean Lin En, how was the war this time? Did we win?" Lydia was very interested in this first battle with the Holy See, but she was busy improving her muskets, so she did not join the battle on the front line. Killing at least 20,000 people with less than 200 casualties should be considered a big victory. Lin En said with a smile, "Only in the battle of defending the city, relying on the range of muskets and artillery, could such exaggerated losses be inflicted." This also proved that his previous decision to give up the initiative to attack and choose to defend the city was extremely correct. After all, they knew nothing about the enemy's intelligence before, so it was better to be cautious. The people present were not surprised at all by this exaggerated casualty ratio. The muskets, artillery and electromagnetic weapons they made according to the drawings given by Lin En were undoubtedly battlefield killers. "It seems that the punitive army sent by the Holy See is just so-so," a witch sneered. After the news of the war spread throughout the wizard land, many people were not optimistic that they could defend the kingdom under the massive invasion of the Holy See, so that some people thought that the end of wizards was coming. Even the parliament was facing a great enemy and had even made preparations to withdraw to the wizard land to defend. However, it now seems that the massive attack of the Holy See is not vulnerable at all, and there is no difference between it and the mob in the kingdom. They were beaten and fled under their new weapons. No, the main force of the Holy See was just a tentative attack this time, and the losses were limited. The dead were basically cannon fodder. The next battle will not be so simple. Lin En shook his head. This time they exposed a lot of weapons and intelligence. The next time the Holy See attacks again, they will definitely be prepared to deal with it. Thinking of this, Lin En looked at Wilson, the alchemist in charge of gunpowder research and development, and asked expectantly, "By the way, what about the smokeless gunpowder and fixed ammunition that I asked you to research? Do you have any clues?" "This has been completed a long time ago." The wizard named Wilson straightened his face, and then asked someone to bring a special musket. "In addition, we have also made the sample of the percussion gun you asked for." Chapter 348 Gatling was a doctor who saved the dying, until he invented the machine gun. Lin En took the long-barreled musket, and after checking and verifying it, he said happily, "Very good, very good. Your progress is faster than we thought." This first battle with the church made Lin En realize the powerlessness of the flintlock when facing the extraordinary army. Just a large-scale auxiliary divine art was enough to greatly reduce the power of the musket. If it is impossible to rely on armor-piercing to instantly kill the approaching enemy, then the poor firing rate of the flintlock becomes a big problem. You can't expect them to use bayonets to fight the God's punishment army, which has a ferocious beast per capita, right? The percussion gun is a great improvement over the flintlock gun. Unlike the latter, which uses flint to ignite gunpowder, the structure of the percussion gun is very close to that of modern guns. It also uses a hammer to hit the firing pin to ignite the primer, and then the primer ignites the propellant to shoot the projectile. The most important thing is that this thing is a breech-loading gun, which means that the bullet is loaded from the back of the barrel. There is no need to clean the rifling frequently. It takes a minute to stuff the lead bullet into the barrel, which greatly improves the firing rate and accuracy. If the firing rate of a flintlock, muzzle-loading gun, is 1 round per minute, then even the first generation of percussion guns, breech-loading guns, can fire more than 10 rounds per minute, and it is not easy to misfire or get wet. The emergence of fixed ammunition also means that the development of another big killer can be put on the agenda, that is, the machine gun. This is what really dominates the battlefield. In the 19th century, machine guns exerted extremely amazing power after being moved to the battlefield. For example, in a war at the end of the 19th century, 50 British soldiers relied on 5 Maxim machine guns to defeat dozens of charges of 5,000 Matabele people, killing more than 3,000 people on the spot. It can be said that it completely changed the status quo of future wars, ended the history of relying on human wave tactics and cavalry to dominate the battlefield, and pushed the war into a more tragic abyss. Lin En didn't want to bring out this killer weapon so quickly before, but judging from the current situation, the flintlock and percussion rifle alone are not enough for them to gain enough advantage on the battlefield full of divine arts and magic. I need a piece of paper and a pen, Lin En suddenly said. The alchemists present were immediately shocked, and without any delay, they immediately found the paper and pen, because the magic star was also here a few days ago, and he casually drew the drawings of the percussion rifle and fixed ammunition. Lin En pondered for a moment, took the feather pen, and drew on the paper page with reference to the information in the intelligent computer. Lydia and others stared at it intently, fearing that they would miss any details. They soon discovered that the musket Lin En drew this time looked a little strange. The main body was a thick and round barrel, with a long thing like a chain in the middle. In the bottom was not a buttstock but a triangular bracket, which looked somewhat similar to a cannon. Dean Lin, what is this? Is it another new type of musket, or an improved artillery? Lydia asked curiously. I call it a machine gun. It is a special automatic musket. Its characteristic is that it can fire continuously and automatically at a very fast rate of fire, Lin explained. Automatic musket. Wilson and others looked at the drawings in front of them, thinking about the function of each component and the meaning of automation. Lin did not mean to keep everyone in suspense, and immediately explained the operating principle of the machine gun to everyone. To put it bluntly, it is a barrel recoil automatic device. The barrel is floating in the machine gun. When the bullet is fired, the machine gun and the barrel are buckled together, using the energy of gunpowder gas as power to open the chamber through the corresponding components. The bolt continues to recoil to eject the empty shell and throw it out of the gun, and then drives the feeding mechanism to compress the recoil spring. Under the action of the spring force, the bolt pushes the bullet into place and fires again, which saves the time of loading ammunition and makes it possible for bullets to be fired automatically. Alchemists such as Lydia and Wilson, who had participated in the development and manufacture of percussion guns, quickly understood the entire operation process and could not help but sigh at the exquisite design of this new musket. They had also discussed and studied how to increase the firing rate of percussion guns again, but they basically worked hard to simplify the process of loading and shooting. Lin En's method was to let the power generated by one shot of the musket drive the second shot, thus building a cycle, without the need for human control at all. What is its firing rate? Wilson asked eagerly. About 1,000 rounds per minute. Lin En thought about it and said, what he took out was an improved version of the famous Gatling rapid-fire machine gun, combined with the automation concept of the subsequent Maxim machine gun. However, considering the weak industrial foundation of the Alchemical Research Institute, the firing rate was not fast, only 1,000 rounds per minute. In fact, it doesn't matter if it's faster or slower, because fixed ammunition is not like lead bullets. It needs to be made manually, and the process is more complicated. Their ammunition supply is definitely insufficient, and it's nothing more than firing in a few seconds or tens of seconds. 1,000 rounds per minute? Wilson almost thought he had heard it wrong. Could it be 1,000 rounds per hour? You know, the firing rate of a percussion gun is already very fast in their eyes. A skilled gunner can complete the loading and firing every 5 to 6 seconds, which is more than 10 times higher than the firing rate of a flintlock. And this machine gun can only be described as outrageous, 1,000 rounds per minute, which means that it can fire 15 rounds per second, which is 150 times the firing rate of a flintlock. What kind of monster is this? Wilson thought about the scene of 50 machine guns appearing on the battlefield, a burst of shooting, and thousands of enemies falling in a row in just a dozen seconds. He couldn't help but shudder all over. Master Dean, which master invented this weapon called machine gun? A wizard couldn't help asking. They really wanted to know who invented this crazy battlefield killing weapon. The person who invented this thing is called Gatling, Lin En said. Before joining the secret society, he was a doctor who saved the dying and the wounded on the battlefield. He witnessed the cruelty of war and the endless grief and death after the war. His original intention of inventing this thing was to reduce casualties, quickly end a war, and achieve true peace. Hearing this, the faces of all the alchemists became extremely strange. They wanted to say something, but finally held it back. Well, this makes sense. As long as all the enemies are dead, there will naturally be peace. It directly solves the problem of war from the root. Chapter 349. Our troops did not sacrifice themselves. They just returned to the Lord's arms ahead of time. I have a good relationship with Master Gatling and have talked with him several times, so I have some understanding of the structure of the machine gun and its operating principle. Lin En continued to explain, it's a pity that this weapon is too dangerous. If it spreads, it may make the war more cruel. Therefore, it was sealed by the Secret Law Society. After it was developed, the old wizard died of depression because of this. It was not until recently that it was needed to deal with the War of the Holy See that it was reactivated. Hearing this, Wilson felt a little regretful. Such a genius who developed a war weapon actually felt like this. He suddenly felt that this must be the most correct decision made by the Secret Law Society. He couldn't imagine what the war would be like after this thing spread. Even if they, the former wizards, were pointed at by a machine gun on the battlefield, they might be shot into sieves. Wilson even suspected that the dean had also participated in the development of this weapon of war. Otherwise, how could he know so much about it and even draw the blueprint directly? If you can build 5 qualified machine guns within a week, I will commend your achievements to the congressman after this war. All those who participated in the development of new muskets will receive a Morning Star Medal. Lin En encouraged. Most of the alchemists present participated in the production and improvement of flintlocks, percussion guns and electromagnetic guns. It would be unreasonable not to give them some rewards. Upon hearing this, Wilson and others were very excited. The Morning Star Medal was undoubtedly what most formal wizards dreamed of in their lives. It was a great honor. As for the more advanced Silver Moon and Corona medals, they were usually prepared for great wizards and legendary wizards. The only exception in the past few hundred years was Lin En. They didn't dare to hope to be compared with this magic star. Lydia was even more excited and could hardly restrain herself. So she would soon become the first halfling witch in history to receive the Morning Star Medal. With the upcoming glory as an incentive, the fatigue caused by staying up late was swept away. After drinking another bottle of energy potion, the alchemists began to think about how to make this thing. Even with the complete drawings, the degree of automation of the machine gun is not comparable to that of the flintlock and percussion guns. There are many technical barriers to overcome, and the 1 week time is very tight. Looking at Wilson and others' overflowing enthusiasm, Lin En nodded with satisfaction. Once they have anti-aircraft laser weapons and several machine guns as trump cards, they don't have to stick to it. and can turn defense into offense. Lin En is very interested in the oil used by the Griffin Knights for arson. In short, he is determined to take this oil-producing land. At night, outside the capital of the Kingdom of Hadritha, amid a burst of prayers and hymns, the ground shook violently, and earth walls more than 2 meters high rose from the ground, forming a temporary camp. Then several cardinals jointly cast a magic barrier, creating a magic barrier that stretched for several kilometers. Because the range of magic is very large, the protective power is very dispersed, and even a ring of magic can easily break it. However, this thing is not used to resist damage. The magic, detect evil, and live perception, are applied to it. The former can detect the fluctuation of magic power, and the latter can make some living things know where to hide. The purpose is to prevent those cunning wizards from sneaking in through deformation, invisibility and other means. Once the magic barrier is attacked, the bishops and priests guarding nearby will rush over immediately. The magic light sprinkled by the barrier brought some comfort to the coalition soldiers who had just experienced a tragic war. However, as soon as they closed their eyes, they would recall the roar of muskets and artillery. The wall soaked in blood has become an indelible nightmare in their hearts. God's people, the devil is walking in the world. Their evil minions have occupied the kingdom and are trying to turn the world into purgatory. Don't be afraid, and don't panic. All this is God's test. Those who sacrificed for God have just returned to the Lord's arms in advance and will enjoy endless peace and joy in the kingdom of God. A priest with a compassionate face loudly proclaimed the Lord's faith under the gaze of a group of anxious soldiers. A dozen priests around him chanted prayers loudly to comfort the stimulated coalition soldiers. Compared with these cannon fathers, the precious griffins enjoyed better treatment. The bishops personally took action to use divine arts to eliminate their fear of thunder magic. The only ones who were not affected were the God's Punishment Army wearing silver armor. Each member of the God's Punishment Army was an elite who had fought through the sea of blood and corpses. They had witnessed their companions die tragically under the fangs of demons and behemoths. It was common for them to conquer and capture dangerous wizards. Therefore, although the siege at noon was extremely tragic, it was not enough to shake their minds and beliefs. At this moment, in the center of the camp, under the protection of a group of silver-armored guards, in a temporary pure white tent, the warrior was listening to the casualty report of this war, which was much higher than the worst-case scenario expected before. The total number of deaths reached more than 23,500, and 117 Griffin Knights and 200 God's Punishment Army died under the thunder net and the extremely fast alchemical equipment that could emit lightning. Listening to the bad news, the faces of the cardinals were gloomy. The result of the first battle can only be described as a shame. Even in the war against the evil god, they had never experienced such a tragic defeat. Poulsen couldn't imagine what kind of uproar would be set off if such news was passed back to the holy city. This was really an insult to the majesty of God. In his opinion, there were such heavy casualties but no results were achieved. It was completely due to Edwill's poor command. We shouldn't have been in a hurry to retreat just now. Although the weapons of those wizards were powerful, they could never be maintained forever. The casualties of 20,000 people may have pushed these evil god believers to the limit. It's like a dam gnawed by insects and ants. It will collapse with a slight push. Poulsen said decisively. He didn't know how muskets and artillery worked, but apart from the great Lord, no power was infinite and eternal. Strong power often means terrible consumption. If at the most intense moment of the war, Edwill forced the Griffin Knights to cooperate with him in the strong attack at all costs, perhaps they would have celebrated their victory in the royal city at this moment. Chapter 350 Edwill. In fact, our strategic goal has been achieved. I think that powerful thunder weapon should be their last trump card, Poulsen said with great confidence. Many bishops present also nodded in unison, believing in the speculation that the evil god believers were already weak. After all, it didn't make sense that they had suffered such heavy casualties, but the other sign was still in full condition. It was very likely that they were just a little bit short of retreating before the wizards could hold on. But how much will it cost to attack like this? A cardinal frowned in dissatisfaction and refuted. If they forcibly attack the city regardless of casualties, even if they could successfully capture the capital in the end, the loss would definitely not be acceptable to them. The coalition forces of the kingdom's nobles would die, but if the gods' punishment army and the Griffin Knights suffered too many casualties, each of them would have to go to the court of justice. For a while, dozens of bishops expressed their opinions in the pure white tent, arguing with red faces. The sound of everyone's dispute made Edwell, who was sitting in the main seat, look more and more unhappy, and an unspeakable sense of oppression began to emerge in the entire tent. The bishops present seemed to be strangled by some force, and the dispute in the tent was almost instantly quelled. Even Poulsen, who was also a cardinal, felt very uncomfortable, as if something was suppressing his body, and speaking seemed to be an extremely luxurious thing. Poulsen turned his head with difficulty and looked at Edwell, who was sitting on the throne, with a look of horror on his face, and immediately remembered the rumors he had heard in the Vatican before. It is rumored that Edwell has obtained the Lord's gift and has taken that step. He is the next supreme judge. This action to conquer the kingdom is to build momentum for Edwell and let him gain enough merit to convince the public. Before, Poulsen scoffed at this rumor. After all, whether in terms of qualifications or piety to the Lord, Edwell is not ranked in the top ranks among the cardinals, so how can he be favored by the Lord? But now it seems that this statement is not groundless. After the tent was completely calm, Edwell spoke. Everyone, the enemy we are facing this time is not the loose and insignificant evil God believers in the past, but the wizard council from the devil's land, hiding behind the scenes to control everything, accumulating power for hundreds of years, and even trying to fight against the church and the empire. Of course, that is just the wishful thinking of the ignorant, but no one knows how many strange and powerful witchcrafts they have developed over the years, and how many innocent souls they have devoured. You should have seen the new weapons developed by those wizards. Edwell looked around at the people present and continued to ask, just talking about the weapons that can emit lightning, how many of you can resist it? The bishops were immediately stunned by the question. They all remembered the terrifying speed of the electromagnetic railgun. Person was somewhat unconvinced. If it was him who was pointed at before, he could have completely avoided it before the attack came. But after thinking it over, Person still didn't dare to argue rashly. He was sure to dodge because the distance was far enough. If he was closer, within 500 meters, he would be in danger after several rounds of attacks. So this attempt is not without results. At least we have some understanding of the new weapons mastered by those evil God believers, Edwell said in a deep voice. In a sense, they have achieved the strategic goal of the first battle. They have verified all the new weapons of the wizards mentioned in the kingdom's secret report. As for the huge alchemical creation that can fly high in the sky, it has been under the pressure of the Griffin Knights and dared not take off casually. The only thing that was beyond his expectation was the unknown lightning net that could cover a large area of airspace, which directly hit the Griffin Knights and made them lose the possibility of quickly capturing the capital. After thinking for a moment, Edwell suddenly looked aside. How much of the task I gave you before have you completed? He immediately knelt on one knee, took out a blueprint, and said respectfully, reporting to Lord Edwell, we have already found out the defense situation in the capital. Edwell's mind moved, and the blueprint in his hand automatically floated and unfolded, presenting it in front of everyone. It was a map of the entire capital. They had seen this map several times when they came here, but those wizards had occupied this place for more than 2 months. So they didn't know about the changes inside before, and undoubtedly recorded all these changes. For example, when encountering an attack, there were a total of 37 places in the capital protected by magic barriers. Those places that might be granaries and weapon depots were circled with red lines. One of the places was guarded more strictly than the royal palace, with thousands of musketeers and more than a dozen wizards guarding it, so that the Griffin Knights who were trying it were almost beaten down. This may be the gathering place of wizards. A bishop speculated. The only place with tighter defense than the royal palace was probably where the great wizards lived. No, impossible. Person shook his head. This place was a wide open area and was the training ground for the knights of the kingdom. The great wizards would never condescend to live in such a place. It was most likely the manufacturing site for those witchcraft weapons. And what surprised person a little was that the places protected by the magic barrier even included several churches in the royal capital. It seemed that although the evil God-believers occupied the royal capital, they were also afraid of the majesty of God and did not dare to destroy the residence of the Lord at will. Paulson thought so, not knowing that the reason why these churches were not demolished was because the tops were high enough, which was suitable for the production of lead bullets. In fact, the interior had already changed a lot, and even the statue of Ella was melted. Otherwise, he would have rushed into the capital in anger to kill this damned blasphemer. Very good. After reading the map, Adul smiled, and then asked someone to bring up a nobleman from the kingdom. It was an old nobleman, about 50 years old, with a thin face and wrinkles all over his face. After seeing Adul, he couldn't wait to bow down. Sir Susie, I think the secret passage leading to the capital should not have been destroyed by those evil God-believers. Adul asked confidently. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.